A single mother lets a broke man sleep on her couch. She never expected what would happen next. The next morning, he does something that leaves her speechless. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Snow fell relentlessly over Cleveland, Ohio, blanketing the streets in a thick coat of white that crunched under every careful footstep. A biting wind rattled the windows of a modest one-story house on the outskirts of the city, where 41-year-old Juliana Butler hurried to bring her groceries inside. She nudged the door shut with her hip, arms full of paper bags threatening to rip at any moment. The cold air followed her in, making her shiver despite the warmth she desperately tried to maintain in her home. Inside, the living room was small but cozy. The sofa had patches on the armrest from years of wear, and the old radiator clanked incessantly, never quite able to keep the entire place warm. A lamp with a slightly torn shade sat atop a thrift store end table, illuminating medical textbooks and a few children's books piled together. The living room led directly into a cramped kitchen where the paint was chipping near the window. Every corner spoke of a life pieced together with determination and care. Juliana placed the groceries on the counter, letting out a tired sigh. After a long shift at the local hospital, she craved a moment to sit down with a cup of tea. Instead, she glanced at the flickering overhead light, making a mental note to change the bulb or check the wiring. At times, it felt like everything in this house was breaking down at once. Her 10-year-old son, Kevin, peeked around the doorway. He had dark brown hair cut simply across his forehead, often falling into his curious green eyes. Despite his tender age, he projected a thoughtful seriousness that tugged at Juliana's heart. He wore a faded superhero t-shirt and clutched a well-worn comic book under his arm. "Hey, Mom," he greeted quietly. "Are you off tomorrow? Maybe we can watch a movie together or play that new board game Aunt Lorraine sent." Juliana smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart. The hospital's been calling me in a lot, but I'll do my best." She looked at her son's hopeful expression and felt an ache deep in her chest. Lately, she had been struggling to balance her role as a mother with the grueling demands of hospital shifts. Bills were piling up, and her old sedan had started making ominous grinding noises. A tune-up was overdue, but that kind of expense felt impossible in the face of late utility payments and mounting credit card debt. As Kevin retreated to his room, Juliana put away the groceries and marveled at how quiet the house could become. She remembered the warmth and laughter that used to fill these walls before her ex-husband left shortly after Kevin was born. It had been more than a decade now, but the lingering scar of betrayal was still there. She rarely spoke about it, not wanting to burden Kevin with the details, yet every so often the pain surfaced in subtle ways, like the hollow nights when she returned from work to find only silence and the hum of the refrigerator. Juliana flipped through a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, biting her lower lip when she saw the red ink on one of the envelopes. Another overdue notice. She traced her fingers across the message, feeling the knot in her stomach tighten. The house's heating system had been acting up, and she worried it would break down just when they needed it most. Cleveland winters could be unforgiving. Determined not to let dread consume her, she brewed a cup of herbal tea and walked over to a small window. Snow-laden branches of the old oak in the front yard sagged under the storm's weight. She thought about the day she'd closed on this house, full of hope for a stable future. That dream felt distant now, but she refused to abandon it. She took a sip of the steaming tea, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow promised more of the same. An early morning trip in her sputtering sedan, a hectic shift at the hospital, and the unrelenting worry over how to make ends meet. Yet she had always prided herself on her capacity to persevere. No matter how daunting life became, she pushed forward for Kevin's sake, even if she sometimes wished for someone to lean on, a shoulder that wouldn't slip away like her ex-husband's had. A sudden gust of wind outside rattled the window once more, reminding her just how cold it was. She glanced at the clock, realizing it was nearly bedtime for Kevin. Taking one last sip of her tea, she switched off the kitchen light and walked to her son's room. She planned to tuck him in and read a few pages of the book he loved. Even in the darkest moments, these small routines brought her comfort and reminded her that, for him, she had to keep going. Standing in the doorway, Juliana noticed Kevin was already drifting off, his comic book resting on his chest. She gently pulled the blanket over him, then brushed a light kiss across his forehead. In moments like this, she felt both tenderness and a gnawing worry in equal measure. She turned off the lamp and quietly closed his door, steeling herself for another long day ahead. The whistling wind outside felt like a distant call, hinting that something was about to change, though she had no way of knowing how drastically her life would be altered by a single act of compassion. The next day began before the sun rose, with Juliana tugging a scarf around her neck while bracing for the bitter cold. She warmed up her aging sedan in the driveway, noticing again the unsettling rattling noise coming from the engine. She made a mental note to find a mechanic, though she wasn't sure where that money would come from. Driving to the hospital through roads slick with ice, she gripped the steering wheel with tense fingers. 1,000 worries buzzed in her mind: overdue bills, Kevin's school projects, hospital overtime, and the squeaking brakes of her car. By the time she arrived at the employee parking lot, grey clouds hovered overhead, promising more snow. Inside the hospital's break room, she peeled off her coat and gloves, looking around at the familiar scuffed linoleum and humming vending machines. Lorraine, a friendly co-worker with short, curly hair, greeted her warmly. "Hey, Julie, you look beat. Rough night." Juliana forced a small smile. "Just the usual," she replied, trying to do it all. "You know how it is." Lorraine offered a sympathetic nod. "We have a full house today. The ER is packed. Accidents from the icy roads. It might be a long shift." Steeling herself for the hours ahead, Juliana filled a paper cup with coffee. She would need all the energy she could muster. The day passed in a blur of ringing call lights, IV changes, and comforting anxious patients. By the time her shift ended, her feet ached and her back felt stiff, but she tried not to complain. The more she worked, the more she could earn, and every cent counted. It was already dark when she left the hospital. Light snow began to fall, coating the sidewalk as she trudged toward the parking lot. Her breath came out in puffs that hung momentarily in the frosty air. Clutching her coat tight, she scanned the area for her car, wishing she had parked closer. At a 24-hour convenience store across the street, a flickering neon sign advertised hot coffee. She decided to stop there before heading home, hoping a warm drink would keep her awake for the drive. The wind was picking up, and she hunched her shoulders against the biting cold as she crossed. Inside, the store was quiet, except for the hum of the overhead lights. She poured coffee into a paper cup, added a bit of sugar, and stood at the counter, rummaging in her purse for loose change. That was when she noticed a figure huddled near the building's entrance. He was pressed against the wall, trying to shield himself from the winter air. Dressed in a threadbare jacket and worn jeans, he looked about her age, mid-40s perhaps, and his short grey hair was dusted with snow. She paid for her coffee and moved closer, feeling a tug of concern in her chest. The man's cheeks were flushed raw from the cold, and his breath came in shudders. He glanced up at her but quickly looked away, as though ashamed to be caught in such a vulnerable position. With a tentative smile, Juliana offered him the untouched cup of coffee she'd just bought. "Hey," she said softly, "it's freezing out here." "Please, take this." He hesitated, but eventually wrapped his numb fingers around the cup, nodding gratefully. "Thank you." he murmured, his voice raspy. The name on his worn jacket read Thomas, though the letters were barely legible. She wondered how long he had been out in this weather. Juliana felt an instinctive pull to help. Maybe it was her background as a nurse or her innate compassion, but she couldn't just walk away. "Is there somewhere you can go tonight?" she asked, trying to keep her tone gentle. "A shelter, maybe. It's too cold to be outside." Thomas hesitated, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Shelters are full," he replied. "I tried earlier. I lost my place a while back." She sensed the deep shame in his voice. The last thing she wanted was to pry, but concern outweighed her hesitation. "I'm Juliana. I live not too far from here." She gestured vaguely in the direction of her neighborhood. "I could at least give you a ride somewhere warmer." He glanced up, something like hope flickering in his weary eyes. Yet there was also fear, maybe fear of rejection, or fear of letting a stranger see how dire his situation was. I don't want to trouble you," he managed. Juliana shook her head. "It's no trouble. It's dangerous out here tonight." In truth, her heart pounded at the thought of inviting a stranger into her car. She was painfully aware that she had Kevin at home, but the image of this man freezing on the sidewalk needled at her conscience. Thomas exhaled a shaky breath, nodding slowly. "All right," he agreed, almost in disbelief. "Thank you." Juliana led him toward her car, which was covered in a light dusting of fresh snow. She glanced at him once more under the harsh parking lot lights, noticing the exhaustion etched into his features. He looked like someone who had been through more than a few battles, a man on the brink, with no safety net left to catch him. Juliana's sedan rattled awake with its usual groan of protest. She felt the familiar dread that it might break down at any second, but it sputtered to life nonetheless. Thomas slid into the passenger seat, carefully balancing the nearly empty coffee cup in his hands. A moment of uneasy silence passed between them, interrupted only by the howling wind outside. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm not far from here. Where did you want me to drop you off?" Thomas rubbed his hands together, as if trying to coax warmth back into them. I'm not sure," he admitted. "If all the shelters are full, I'll figure something else out." The conflict raged in Juliana's mind. She recalled Kevin waiting at home, likely reading or playing a video game. The idea of bringing a stranger into her personal space felt risky. Yet something about Thomas's quiet demeanor and the desperation in his eyes made it hard for her to simply wish him luck and let him go. She pulled onto the main road, the headlights revealing swirling flurries of snow. The roads were slick, requiring her full attention, but her thoughts kept drifting to the man beside her. Clearing her throat, she ventured carefully, "I have a couch. It's not the most comfortable, but it's warm. You could stay for a night or two, just until you figure something out. This storm isn't going away soon." He turned to her, brows knit. "That's incredibly kind, but I don't want to impose." "You don't even know me." She risked a quick glance at him, noticing the uncertainty in his expression. "I know you're cold, and I can't leave you like this. I'm a nurse. I've seen what hypothermia can do to people." Thomas hesitated, staring at the steaming vents on the car's dashboard as if trying to make sense of his fortune. "My name is Thomas Walker," he finally said, a faint tremor in his voice. "Thank you, truly. I promise I won't cause trouble." They fell silent again, the lull occasionally broken by the car's engine noises. Juliana's mind whirled with doubts. She had always warned Kevin about talking to strangers or letting them get too close. Her ex-husband's betrayal had taught her hard lessons about trust and vulnerability, yet here she was, practically inviting a man she'd met minutes ago to sleep under her roof. Fear coiled in her stomach, but there was another voice, her conscience telling her she was doing the right thing. When they reached her neighborhood, the streetlights cast faint pools of yellow on the fresh snow. Houses were spaced modestly apart, each with a small driveway. Juliana pulled into hers, and the car lurched to a stop. She turned off the headlights, took a shaky breath, and faced Thomas. I need to check on my son, Kevin," she explained, hoping he understood the gravity of her decision. Thomas nodded, appearing uneasy himself. "I get it. If you want me to wait outside, I can—" She shook her head quickly. "No, come on in. It's warmer inside, and you'll freeze out here." She stepped out, breath catching in the frosty air, and led him to the front door. A flicker of second-guessing crept into her mind as she unlocked it, but she pushed it away. Kevin was already standing in the living room when they entered. He looked up from a comic book, eyes widening at the sight of a stranger behind his mother. Juliana's heart hammered. She closed the door, ushering Thomas in. "Kevin, this is Mr. Walker," she said softly. "He was out in the cold," and Kevin didn't need any more explanation. He put down the comic book and gave a polite nod. There was hesitation in the air, a mutual caution. Juliana could sense Kevin's unspoken questions. Who is this man? Why is he here? Is it safe? Thomas offered a small, grateful smile. "Nice to meet you, Kevin. I'm sorry for barging in." "It's okay," Kevin replied, although his voice was quiet. He seemed to sense his mother's concern. She placed a reassuring hand on Kevin's shoulder, guiding him toward the hallway. "Hey, bud," she murmured, bending down to speak to him in a hushed tone. "I'll explain everything, but for now, let's just be kind and offer him a warm place to stay." Kevin nodded, trusting his mother's judgment more than anything. Juliana returned to the living room, gesturing to the sofa. "I know it's not much," she said to Thomas. "There's a spare blanket in the closet. I can get you some clean sheets." Thomas's voice was subdued. "You're doing more than enough." "Thank you." He settled onto the couch, appearing both relieved and exhausted. A wave of second thoughts washed over her, but the sight of Thomas shivering less, finally out of the frigid night, comforted her. She checked the thermostat, pressing a few buttons in hopes of coaxing a bit more heat from the radiator. Kevin lingered nearby, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, uncertain but not fearful. Juliana noticed the uncertainty in her son's posture and offered him a subtle nod, as if to say everything would be all right, despite the knots forming in her own stomach. Morning arrived, with pale sunlight fighting through heavy clouds. Juliana had dozed fitfully, constantly alert to unfamiliar sounds in the house. Each creak of the floorboards made her heart pound as she half expected something to go terribly wrong. She told herself it was only a matter of time before trust would replace this unease, if everything indeed proved safe. In the small kitchen, Juliana brewed coffee, feeling grateful the old coffee maker still worked. She glanced at the clock on the wall, shaped like a rooster, noting she was already running late for the hospital. Kevin sat at the table, finishing a bowl of cereal. He shot a few curious looks toward the living room, where Thomas still slept. At some point in the early morning, Juliana had laid out a comforter for him. Now, only the top of his head and a tuft of grey hair were visible. With a gentle gesture, she ushered Kevin away. "Get your backpack ready, honey. We'll leave in a few minutes." She checked her phone for missed messages and saw that Lorraine had left a text. "Busy day ahead. Be prepared for a double shift if needed." Juliana sighed, feeling the weight of her responsibilities press down more fiercely than ever. Just as she was about to gather her keys and coat, Thomas stirred in the living room. He rose and folded the blanket, carefully placing it over the back of the sofa. Spotting Juliana in the kitchen, he offered a tentative smile. "Good morning," he said, voice hoarse with sleep. "I appreciate the place to stay. If you want, I can head out now." She waved off his concern. "Please, Have some coffee first, and don't feel like you have to rush off. It's still pretty cold out there." Quickly setting a mug on the counter, she added, "I'm a nurse at St. Mary's. I have to get to work, and Kevin has school." Thomas nodded, noticing how her eyes darted between him, the door, and the clock. "Look, I'm good at fixing things. Cars, appliances. If you need any quick repairs, I can try to help out. It's the least I can do to repay your kindness." Juliana paused, remembering the ominous sounds her sedan had been making. "My car's been acting up. It might just be old age, but if you're sure you don't mind—" "I don't mind," he answered more decisively than he'd spoken the night before. "Maybe I can fix a few things here while you're at work, too." She studied his expression, catching a glimpse of genuine determination. Something told her this man was more than just a down-on-his-luck drifter. Still, caution tugged at her. "I'll think about it," she said, handing him the coffee. "Kevin and I need to head out now. There's food in the fridge. Help yourself to anything. We won't be back until late afternoon." Thomas accepted the mug, wrapping his hands around it for warmth. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." His tone was humble, yet there was a flicker of pride behind his eyes. Juliana hurried Kevin out the door, carefully locking it behind her. As she started the car, the engine wheezed loudly, prompting a grimace. Kevin settled in the back seat, asked quietly, "Is he going to stay, Mom?" She glanced at her son in the rearview mirror. "Just for a bit, until he's back on his feet." "I won't let anything happen to us, okay?" Kevin nodded, trusting her implicitly. The short drive to school was marked by the usual winter hazards: slick roads, cautious drivers, and traffic crawling along. She dropped Kevin off at the entrance, watching him bundle up tightly in his coat before disappearing through the doors. Then she navigated toward the hospital, mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Was it safe to leave Thomas alone in her house? Could she possibly be making a terrible mistake? The day at St. Mary's felt longer than usual. While she administered medications and checked vitals, her thoughts drifted to Kevin and to Thomas. She remembered the exhaustion etched in his face and how sincerely grateful he seemed. There was a quiet dignity about him, something that spoke to a history of once having more than he did now. Between patients, she peeked at her phone, half expecting messages from Kevin about something gone wrong at home, but there was nothing. By the time her shift ended, the sky had turned a murky grey. Another snowfall was on its way. She retrieved Kevin from an after-school program and headed home, tension mounting in her chest. They parked at the curb, stepping carefully onto the icy walkway. Before she even reached the front door, she heard a faint clinking of metal from the garage area. Heart pounding, she ushered Kevin inside, telling him to drop his backpack in his room. She found Thomas crouched by the sedan's open hood, using a small flashlight to inspect the engine. A toolbox lay open beside him, revealing neatly arranged wrenches and screwdrivers. He looked up with a calm expression. "I think I've figured out part of the problem. Your alternator belt is worn, and there's a leak in the cooling system. I can patch it for now, but you might need new parts eventually." Surprise flooded her. "You did all this today?" He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Also fixed the wobbly chair in your kitchen and tightened a leaking pipe under the sink. I hope that's okay." A rush of gratitude and relief swept through Juliana. For the first time, she felt the edges of her unease begin to soften, replaced by cautious optimism. That evening, snow piled higher against the windows, and the temperature plummeted so drastically that the old heater wheezed under the strain. In the living room, Kevin finished his homework at the small coffee table, bundling himself in a thick sweater. Juliana stifled a yawn, flipping through the day's mail. Another set of bills, more overdue notices. Anxiety churned in her gut. Thomas stood by the kitchen entrance, his posture hesitant. "I replaced a fuse in your laundry area. The dryer was causing the breaker to trip." She looked up from the envelopes with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "You've been busy. I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "I'm just making myself useful. I don't want you to feel like I'm a burden." Before she could respond, Kevin piped up from the living room. "Mom, do you think Mr. Walker could fix that squeaky hinge on my bedroom door?" His voice was eager, without the caution he'd shown the day before. Thomas smiled softly. "Sure thing, Kevin. Just show me where it is." As they disappeared down the hallway, Juliana was left alone with her thoughts. She realized she needed to talk to Thomas. Really talk. It wasn't just about letting him stay. It was about understanding what had brought him to that convenience store in the first place. She rubbed her temples, mind awash in conflicting emotions. The short time he'd been here, he had already alleviated a handful of minor problems. Yet, opening her home to a stranger came with obvious risks. She gathered her courage and went to find them. She discovered Thomas in Kevin's room, tightening the screws on the door hinge while Kevin hovered, fascinated. Juliana cleared her throat gently. "Thomas, could we speak for a moment?" Kevin took the hint and retreated to the living room, letting the two adults step aside into the hallway. Juliana kept her voice low, aware that Kevin had sharp ears. I need to know more about your situation. I hope you understand. Kevin's my first priority, and I can't afford to put him in danger." Thomas exhaled, leaning against the wall. "I understand completely. You deserve an explanation. I'm not proud of where I am. I used to be a mechanic. Actually, I owned a small auto repair shop. Then things went wrong. Business deals fell apart, and I ended up losing everything." She studied him, searching for any sign of deception. In his eyes, she glimpsed genuine remorse. "Have you ever been in trouble with the law, or anything that might come back on us?" She hated asking, but needed to be sure. He paused, running a hand through his hair. "Not in the sense you might think. My financial situation got complicated, debts, a lawsuit, but I never hurt anyone. I'm not dangerous, Juliana." Her tense shoulders relaxed slightly at his use of her first name. "You can stay here another night," she said softly. "Maybe a few more, but I'm not sure how long I can keep it up. I don't have much space or money. I'm behind on so many bills, and Her voice cracked, revealing her exhaustion. Thomas nodded, a determined look crossing his face. "Let me keep helping. I can fix your car and maybe do more repairs around the house. We could figure out how to get parts cheap, or see if I can bring in some money by doing small repair jobs for the neighbors. People need cars fixed, appliances tuned up." It's a start. The idea took her by surprise, lighting a small flame of hope within. "I wouldn't know where to begin," she admitted. "I'm just trying to stay afloat. I've never run any sort of side business." He offered a reassuring shrug. "I'm not suggesting anything big or complicated, but a few odd jobs here and there might help us both. You've already done so much for me by letting me in." The words "us both" echoed in her mind, sparking a ripple of caution. Still, the notion that she could perhaps earn a little extra while giving him a path forward seemed almost too good to dismiss. She mulled it over, feeling the weight of her uncertainty diminish just a fraction. If he could fix her car properly, that would be a huge relief on its own. Kevin's voice drifted from the living room. "Mom, can we eat soon? I'm starving." Juliana offered Thomas a small smile. "I should get dinner started. There's not much in the fridge, but I can make some pasta." Thomas followed her to the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. "Mind if I help?" he asked, glancing around for a pot. "I used to cook in my spare time. Helps me relax." She handed him the utensils, both of them easing into a tentative camaraderie. The slight tension of sharing a space with a near stranger was still there, but it was softened by the aroma of garlic and simmering tomatoes. As they prepared the meal, Kevin joined, setting the table with mismatched plates and cups. A fragile sense of normalcy seemed to settle around them, an unspoken agreement to see what tomorrow would bring. A brisk wind whipped through Cleveland streets the next morning as Juliana slipped into her heavy coat and stepped outside. The clouds overhead threatened more snow. Yet for once, she didn't feel the usual dread. She had woken up to the surprising realization that Thomas's presence no longer provoked the same anxiety as before. Despite lingering reservations, his genuine willingness to help had begun to ease her fears. Inside the hospital, the corridors bustled with nurses and doctors, hustling to meet the morning rush of patients. Juliana entered the break room, her shoulders tense from maneuvering through traffic on icy roads. She found Lorraine seated at a small round table, flipping through a dated magazine. Lorraine's short, curly hair bounced as she looked up with a curious smile. "Julie," Lorraine greeted, setting the magazine aside. "You're practically glowing. Something happened?" She lifted a brow, obviously fishing for a conversation. Juliana sat and warmed her hands around a styrofoam cup of coffee. "Not glowing, more like a little less stressed," she replied with a wry laugh. "I ended up taking in someone who needed a place to stay. It's only temporary, but it's been an interesting few days." Lorraine's eyes widened. "You did what? Girl, I can't decide if that's the bravest or the craziest thing you've ever done." Juliana exhaled, staring down at the swirl of her coffee. "Yeah, well, I couldn't leave him out in that cold. He's been helping around the house, which I guess is a relief. He's fixed my car, the dryer, the squeaky doors, practically everything that's been on my to-do list for months." Lorraine tapped her fingers on the table. "This guy sounds handy, but be careful. You and Kevin don't need trouble." "That's what worries me," Juliana admitted, "but I have to trust my instincts. He seems earnest, and Kevin likes him. Honestly, I needed the help. I'm behind on bills, the house is falling apart, and the hospital might not give me overtime forever." Lorraine studied her for a moment, then gave a decisive nod. "You know, I might be able to offer a little guidance. My cousin, Beth, works at a legal aid clinic. She's helped folks sort out complicated financial problems. I can give you her number. Maybe you can talk to her about reorganizing your debts or seeing if you're eligible for any assistance. You've been juggling so much on your own." Juliana felt a wave of gratitude and relief at the offer. "Thank you, Lorraine. I'd appreciate any help. I'll reach out to Beth soon." Lorraine squeezed Juliana's hand gently. "Look, I know how hard it's been since everything. Don't try to shoulder all the burdens alone." Her eyes glimmered with sincerity. "Let's just say I'm rooting for you." Before Juliana could respond, an overhead page summoned them both to the emergency room. The day became a whirlwind of patient care, leaving Juliana with little time to think about her new living situation. Yet Lorraine's words lingered in her mind. Don't try to shoulder all the burdens alone. When her shift finally ended, a dark sky and the glow of streetlights greeted her outside. She drove cautiously home, still uncertain about the wisdom of having Thomas under her roof. But the memory of his respectful demeanor and Kevin's genuine excitement quelled her worst fears. She arrived to find the house enveloped in a cozy hush. Stepping inside, she stomped snow off her boots, calling out a soft greeting. Thomas appeared in the hallway, wiping his hands on a towel. "Welcome back," he offered. I took the liberty of making dinner." "Hope that's okay. Nothing fancy, just some chicken soup and a bit of rice." The aroma was heavenly, and her stomach responded with a low growl. Juliana felt her usual wariness slip away. "That sounds amazing. Thank you." She set her keys on the kitchen counter, noticing the sink was clear of dirty dishes. "You didn't have to do all this." He shrugged. "Kevin seemed hungry when he got home, and I figured I could pull my weight." He told me about some project he's working on for school, something about local history, so while he was drawing pictures for it, I cooked. Kevin shuffled in from the living room, offering his mom a quick hug before lifting the lid off the pot to inhale the steam. "It smells great, Mom," he said, excitement in his eyes. "Thomas told me you might be working late, so he decided to surprise you." They gathered around the small dining table. Juliana paused, taking in the scene. She couldn't remember the last time someone other than her or Kevin had made dinner in this house. A pang of wistfulness struck her as she recalled her ex-husband's few attempts at cooking before their marriage unraveled. She pushed the thought aside. Seated around steaming bowls of soup, conversation flowed more freely. Thomas asked Kevin about his favorite subjects in school, praising his knowledge of science. Juliana listened, noticing how Kevin's guarded tone from before had eased into genuine enthusiasm. There was a gentle, almost familial warmth in the air that she hadn't felt in a long time. As they finished dinner, Kevin slipped away to read in his room, and Thomas began washing dishes. Juliana hovered beside him, drying plates with a dish towel. She hesitated, recalling Lorraine's advice to seek outside help. In Thomas, she sensed a similarly cautious spirit, someone who might also need a guiding voice. Perhaps Lorraine, or more specifically Lorraine's cousin Beth, could provide more than just financial guidance for Juliana. Maybe she could guide Thomas as well. For now, though, the promise of a potential mentor lingered in her mind, reminding her that relying on friends wasn't a weakness. Juliana set the last dish aside, letting herself enjoy this brief moment of peace. The house was warm despite the winter's fury outside, and for once she didn't feel so alone. Deep down, she knew that the real trials lay ahead, but at least she was no longer facing them all by herself. The next morning arrived with a relentless snowfall that muffled the usual sounds of the neighborhood. Even the rumble of garbage trucks was muted, blanketed by the white hush. Juliana woke to find a text from the hospital scheduler. Additional staff not required. Stay on call. It was an unexpected reprieve from her demanding routine, though also a slight blow to her finances. Overtime, pay was the lifeblood of her budget these days. After helping Kevin bundle up and head to school, she poured herself a cup of coffee. Thomas was already busy in the garage, rummaging around the sedan's engine. She pulled on a sweater and joined him, arms crossed against the chilly air. "Find anything new?" she asked, eyeing the open hood. Thomas straightened, wiping grease from his hands. "I gave it a deeper inspection. You'll definitely need a replacement belt and some minor parts soon, but I patched what I could. It should hold for a bit." She offered a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you. That's more help than I've had in ages. You mentioned looking for part-time work to earn some money. Any leads?" He looked away, frustration evident on his face. "It's tough. Most shops want to see a stable work history or references, and I don't have those anymore. My old contacts, well, let's just say we're not on good terms." Juliana nodded, recalling his mention of lawsuits and lost business. "I might know someone," she ventured. "My friend Lorraine has a cousin at a legal aid clinic. Maybe they can advise you on how to untangle some of the paperwork or get you some references." Thomas turned to her, a mixture of relief and anxiety shining in his eyes. "Are you sure? I don't want to stir up trouble, but if it means I can get a fresh start, I'm willing to try." She placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. "It's worth exploring. We all need a little help sometimes." They returned to the house, and Juliana dialed Lorraine's number. Within minutes, Lorraine agreed to put them in touch with her cousin Beth. They set up a brief phone consultation for the following day. Thomas listened intently, his expression a blend of hope and apprehension. He then excused himself, heading out to pick up a few groceries with money he'd earned from a side job, fixing a neighbor's space heater the previous night. Left alone, Juliana sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee in silence. She gazed around, noticing how her home felt slightly different. The clutter of unfinished repairs was mostly gone, replaced by tidier corners and small improvements. Yet she still worried about the mounting bills that weighed on her soul. Venturing away from her old coping mechanisms, managing everything on her own, felt like stepping onto unstable ground. In the afternoon, she decided to drive over to Lorraine's neighborhood. The roads were hazardous with packed snow, but the distance wasn't too great. Upon arriving, she parked near a modest row of brick houses. Lorraine's place stood out with its cheerful wreath hanging on a bright blue door. Lorraine greeted Juliana warmly, ushering her inside with a flurry of apologies about the mess. "I just wanted to thank you," Juliana said, stepping past a pile of folded laundry on the living room couch. "You didn't have to get us that legal aid contact, but..." Lorraine dismissed her thanks with a wave. "Please, you've done more for me over the years than you realize. I'm happy to help. You're stepping into new territory, Julie, and that can be scary. Sometimes leaving behind our old ways of handling life is as big as moving to another city." They sat down at her small dining table. Lorraine pulled out her phone, scrolling to find Beth's message. "She's expecting a call tomorrow. She says to have Thomas gather any documents he has, even if they're outdated or incomplete." Juliana bit her lip. "He might not have much. He left a lot behind." Lorraine frowned sympathetically. "Then we'll do the best we can with what's there." They spoke for a while longer, discussing Kevin's school progress and how he was adapting to the changes at home. Lorraine, in a gentle but direct manner, also asked if Juliana felt safe. "Thomas isn't giving you any bad vibes, right?" she pressed. Juliana shook her head, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "There's always a risk, I know, but so far, he's been nothing but respectful. Kevin trusts him too, which is a big deal. I'm not blind to what could happen, though." Lorraine reached over and squeezed her hand. "Just stay smart about it, okay?" On the drive back, Juliana mulled over those last words. She recognized that in offering Thomas more than just a couch to crash on, she was crossing into uncharted territory. This was no longer the simple life she'd once known. Work, pay bills, raise Kevin, sleep, repeat. She was letting someone else in, and not just into her home, but into the delicate balance of her family. A new phase of her life seemed to be unfolding, marked by the decision to leave behind the familiar cage of constant self-reliance. The snow draped over her windshield in thick waves, but Juliana pressed on, determined to face whatever came next, mindful of the challenges but no longer convinced she had to handle them alone. A few evenings later, the sun dipped below Cleveland's skyline, bathing the quiet streets in the dim glow of street lamps. Juliana found herself in the passenger seat of her own car, with Thomas behind the wheel. They had decided to test the sedan's patched repairs on a short drive. Kevin stayed at a neighbor's house, catching up on a social studies project with a friend, leaving Juliana and Thomas to focus on the car's performance. Thomas navigated slowly, listening intently for any odd noises. "It's running smoother than before," he observed, his tone carrying a hint of pride. Juliana relaxed into her seat, noticing the diminished rattles that used to plague the engine. "I can't thank you enough," she said, genuinely grateful. "I've had to rely on this car for everything: grocery runs, getting Kevin to appointments, and driving to work at all hours." He gave a short nod, eyes on the road. "I'm happy to help. You've been kind to me, and it feels good to repay that kindness." They turned onto a residential street lined with small, snow-covered yards. Juliana spotted a flickering neon sign advertising a local diner. Impulsively, she pointed to it. "Why don't we pull in there? We can grab a quick bite. My treat." Thomas hesitated but finally agreed. He found a parking space near the entrance, and they stepped out into the biting cold, breath-forming clouds in the air. Inside, the diner was a cozy contrast, warmed by the aroma of fried food and fresh coffee. The walls were decorated with black and white photos of Cleveland's historic neighborhoods, lending a nostalgic charm. They chose a booth by a fogged-up window. A waitress approached, smiling and offering menus. After a moment of scanning the laminated pages, they each decided on a simple meal of soup and sandwiches. As the waitress walked away, an air of unspoken tension seemed to gather between them. Juliana looked around, noticing the gentle hum of other customers' conversations. Thomas cleared his throat, lacing his fingers together on the table. "I appreciate this, but are you sure you can afford it? You've mentioned your bills. I don't want you to waste money on me." She managed a small, reassuring smile. "It's a modest diner, Thomas. We're not exactly splurging on lobster dinners. Besides, it's nice to be out of the house for a bit and talk." He nodded, visibly relieved. "So, tomorrow's the phone call with Beth from the legal aid clinic, right?" "Yes. She wanted to speak with both of us if possible," Juliana replied. "She might have suggestions for your situation. Maybe we can figure out the best way to address whatever debts or legal issues are following you." He exhaled slowly, looking down at his hands. "I hate dragging you into all this," he admitted, "but I also realize I need help. My ex-business partner practically ruined me. I want to set things right, maybe prove to people I'm not some irresponsible leech." Juliana reached across the table, giving his hand a quick, gentle squeeze. "You're not dragging me into anything. Helping you find stability helps me too. If you can work again, it means you won't be stuck on my couch forever." She ended with a light chuckle, hoping to break the seriousness. The waitress arrived with steaming bowls of tomato soup, setting down plates of grilled cheese sandwiches soon after. Juliana couldn't remember the last time she felt so at ease over a simple meal. The chatter from nearby booths mingled with the clinking of silverware, creating a comforting background buzz. She realized that for the first time in a long while, she was enjoying an evening without the looming dread of her overburdened responsibilities. "Tell me more about your garage," she said between sips. "When did you first get into the mechanic business?" Thomas's gaze flickered with a reminiscent glow. "I grew up working in my uncle's auto shop. I loved tinkering with engines, seeing how all the parts fit together to make a car run. Eventually, I saved enough to open my own place. That was my dream." For a while, it went well. She listened attentively, piecing together a picture of a man who once thrived, only to have the rug pulled out from under him. At times, he spoke with anger, recalling betrayal. Other times, regret surfaced in his voice when he admitted to trusting the wrong people or failing to see warning signs. Juliana understood how easily someone could become trapped by circumstances outside their control. When they finished eating, she settled the bill, brushing off Thomas's offer to chip in the little cash he had earned. As they walked back to the car, the winter air stung their faces, but the sense of solidarity between them gave the night a different kind of warmth. This short outing, though seemingly mundane, felt like a quiet ceremony, an acknowledgement that their lives were now intertwined in ways neither had expected. They drove home in companionable silence, the sedan humming reliably beneath them. Thomas parked in the driveway, turning off the engine with a nod of satisfaction. Although they had no guarantee of success in the challenges ahead, the evening meal had affirmed one thing. They were both prepared to venture deeper into this unknown phase of mutual assistance, trusting that, step by step, they could navigate the unfamiliar together. Sunlight filtered through the curtained windows of Juliana's living room, signaling a rare day off for her. She had set her alarm early, determined to make use of the time for the scheduled phone call with Beth, the legal aid contact. Kevin was already at school, and Thomas sat across from her at the dining table. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. Juliana dialed on speaker, and Beth's voice crackled through the line. She introduced herself. Her tone was brisk but friendly, immediately taking command of the conversation. "Lorraine told me a bit about your situation. She mentioned some debts, potential legal entanglements, and a need for advice on stable employment opportunities." Thomas cleared his throat, leaning over the phone. "Yes, ma'am, I lost my business a while back. There were lawsuits, unpaid debts. I was never able to fully recover. Part of it was my fault for trusting the wrong partner, but it's complicated." Beth made a thoughtful humming sound. "Do you have any documents, old bank statements, court notices, anything like that?" He glanced at Juliana, then answered, "I've got some court papers in my duffel bag. They're pretty old, but I salvaged what I could." "Dig them out," Beth instructed. "We can take an initial look. You might be eligible for a bankruptcy filing or a settlement negotiation. Sometimes creditors are willing to work out a deal rather than chase someone indefinitely." Juliana listened, absorbing each piece of information with a growing sense of hope. She had never gone through anything like this before. "Beth, what about me?" she asked. "I'm behind on mortgage payments and my credit cards are piling up." Beth's voice remained calm and informative. "We can talk about restructuring or consolidation. Your job as a nurse is a stable position, which often works in your favor. You might even qualify for certain relief programs, depending on your exact income and debt ratio." The idea of not standing alone in this financial maze made Juliana feel both relief and a mild panic at how far she'd let her situation slip. Thomas, seemingly reading her reaction, placed a reassuring hand on her forearm. She gave him a small nod, grateful for the silent support. Beth explained the steps they would need to take, gathering all relevant documents, listing debts, identifying any outstanding legal actions. She proposed an in-person consultation at the clinic downtown. "One key point," she added. "If your ex-business partner ever engaged in fraudulent activity, Thomas, you may have legal grounds to separate your liability from his." He straightened, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "That's exactly what happened. I just never had the resources to prove it." "Then we'll work on it," Beth concluded. "You have my number. Let's schedule a time next week." After the call ended, Juliana slumped in her chair, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Thomas looked equally drained, but a spark of hope simmered beneath his fatigue. "That was a lot," he said quietly, running a hand through his grey hair. She nodded, pushing her phone aside. "A lot, but it feels like a direction. At least we know there's a path, even if it's not straightforward." In the following days, the house became a temporary command center for their newfound mission. Juliana combed through her own bills and statements, while Thomas methodically sorted the meager records he'd retained from his failed business. Kevin observed from the sidelines, occasionally offering moral support in the form of homemade drawings or silly jokes to lighten the mood. As they pieced everything together, new challenges surfaced. Thomas discovered an outstanding credit line under his name that he'd never personally opened. Juliana found an unexpected notice about an adjustable mortgage rate increase. Each revelation felt like another wave crashing over them, but they pressed on, buoyed by each other's resolve. The neighbors began to notice Thomas's presence too. Some were merely curious, inquiring politely about the helpful mechanic who had done a small repair on a space heater or a garage door. Others, more suspicious, eyed him warily from their porches. Juliana did her best to handle it gracefully, simply explaining he was an old friend of the family who was staying for a while. At work, Lorraine asked Juliana daily updates about her new roommate, half joking but also genuinely concerned. "It sounds like you're stepping into a whole different world," she remarked one afternoon in the hospital hallway. "Legal clinics, rummaging through old debts. That's not the Juliana who used to handle everything quietly on her own." Juliana managed a small laugh, nodding in agreement. "I guess I'm learning a new set of rules, one where I actually let people help me, and to be honest, it's both terrifying and kind of freeing." By the end of the week, they had compiled a tidy stack of documents to present to Beth. Though the future remained uncertain, Juliana felt a subtle shift in her perspective. She was no longer carrying her burdens alone. She was sharing them, learning to lean on people like Lorraine and Beth, and especially on Thomas, whose presence had turned from stranger to ally. The unfamiliar world of legal proceedings and consolidated payments might be daunting, but having an ally in that realm made all the difference. Early Saturday morning, bright winter sunlight bounced off the snowdrifts piled high along the curbs. Juliana woke to the muffled laughter of Kevin and Thomas coming from the kitchen. She found them engrossed in a minor mechanical project, Kevin's old remote control car, which hadn't worked in months. Thomas was showing Kevin how to align the tiny gears, and Kevin's eyes shone with excitement as he followed each step carefully. "Morning," Juliana greeted, smiling softly at the sight. She approached the table to see the small screwdriver in Kevin's hand and a scattered array of wires. Thomas offered a nod. Kevin wanted to see how these parts fit together. "Figured it would be a fun lesson." Kevin grinned. "We're almost done, Mom. Thomas says once we fix this loose connection, it should run again." There was pride in his voice, a delight in learning something new. Juliana reached for the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, feeling a sudden wave of gratitude. Their arrangement, though born of desperation, had brought a rare sense of camaraderie. She sipped her coffee, letting herself enjoy the scene. A few moments later, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen to find a text from Bill Carmichael, a neighbor on the next street. He needed a bit of car troubleshooting and had heard Thomas was the man for the job. Juliana read the message aloud, looking to Thomas for confirmation. He smiled, relieved. "I did a quick tune-up for Bill's sister last week. If he needs more help, I'm glad to do it." Kevin's face lit up at the thought of another project. "That's awesome!" After breakfast, they drove to Bill's house, a modest property with a short driveway. Bill, a hefty man in his early 50s, greeted them with a hearty grin. "Hey, thanks for coming out. My truck's been making a rattling noise for weeks. Local repair shops were quoting me an arm and a leg just to diagnose it." Thomas crouched by the vehicle, listening closely as he asked Bill to start the engine. Within minutes, he had pinpointed the likely source: a loose heat shield and a worn pulley. Juliana and Kevin stood aside, chatting with Bill about the best local hardware stores while Thomas did a temporary fix. Bill watched, shaking his head in admiration. "You really know your stuff. Ever think about opening your own shop again?" Thomas paused, meeting Juliana's gaze across the driveway. "I'd like that, eventually. There are a few obstacles I need to sort out first." Bill nodded with understanding. "Well, once you're up and running, you've got my business. There are lots of folks around here who need reliable repairs but can't afford the markups." The sense of community blossomed further as neighbors driving by slowed down to see what was happening. Some waved hello. Others leaned out to ask if Thomas might have time later in the week to look at their vehicles. By the time he finished with Bill's truck, he had 2 more informal appointments penciled in. Word was spreading quickly, and though it wasn't official, it felt like the start of something promising. Back home, Kevin ran inside to get a snack while Juliana and Thomas lingered by the car. "I never expected so many people to show interest," Juliana remarked, impressed. Thomas shrugged modestly. It's good to feel useful, and I'll be honest, these small jobs help me get by. Hopefully, once we talk to Beth, I can sort out the legal stuff and actually work without looking over my shoulder. She nodded. I'm glad. It's a step in the right direction, and you've helped me realize how valuable community support can be. I've always tried to do everything alone, but seeing neighbors come together, it's eye-opening. They stepped inside, warming their hands and feet by the old radiator. Kevin emerged from the kitchen with a glass of juice, peering curiously at Thomas. What's next? Another car? Something else to fix? Thomas ruffled Kevin's hair lightly. We'll see. Maybe you can help me if you're free after school next week. Kevin beamed, clearly enjoying the prospect of learning more about repairs. Juliana watched them, reflecting on how naturally Thomas had settled into their daily rhythm. No longer was he a silent figure on the couch. He was becoming a reassuring presence, even a role model of sorts for Kevin. Neighbors like Bill were recognizing his skills, further dispelling the outsider aura he once carried. Over the following days, more neighbors popped by, some requesting appliance repairs or advice on home projects. A few were driven by curiosity, wanting to see who this miracle mechanic was, and left with a friendlier impression than they came in with. Juliana, still wary of her finances, saw that every small payment Thomas received went toward parts, shared groceries, or putting aside a little something for larger repairs. He wasn't taking advantage of her. He was actively contributing, forging a sense of partnership in the household. By the week's end, it was evident that they weren't alone in this journey anymore. Allies emerged from unexpected corners: Lorraine, Beth, and now even neighbors who once gave Thomas suspicious looks. In this supportive circle, Juliana realized she was rediscovering a sense of trust, one small act at a time. Inspired by a man who was neither family nor friend at the start, yet who had slowly become both. Even as Thomas's reputation grew in the neighborhood, unease began creeping in from another direction. One afternoon, Juliana arrived home to find Thomas on the phone, brow furrowed, voice tense. When he noticed her, he ended the call abruptly, his expression grave. She set down her purse. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. Thomas glanced at the phone in his hand, then looked up at her with an uneasy sigh. It was someone calling about an outstanding debt. But it wasn't just a polite reminder. They threatened court action if I didn't pay soon. They also said they know I'm in Cleveland now. A chill coursed through Juliana's stomach, heavier than the winter cold. She swallowed, urging her voice to remain steady. That means they might come here? He hesitated, glancing at the doorway that led to Kevin's room. I don't know. Debt collectors can be aggressive. But I also had some bad business entanglements. People who aren't afraid to bend the rules to get what they want. Juliana felt a flash of protectiveness. The idea of Kevin being exposed to threats or harassment unsettled her deeply. You should talk to Beth, she said firmly. She told us she'd help address any intimidation tactics. This is exactly the sort of thing you shouldn't face alone. Thomas nodded, but anxiety clouded his expression. I don't want to drag you or Kevin into this mess. Maybe I should find somewhere else to stay, someplace out of the neighborhood, so nobody can track me here. She tensed, torn between relief at the prospect of removing potential danger from her home and dismay at the thought of him leaving abruptly. Thomas, if you think you're protecting us, I get it, but we've come this far. Don't run away from your problems now. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Kevin bounding into the living room. He glanced between them, picking up on the tension. Is everything okay? He asked, eyes flicking warily from Thomas to his mother. Juliana forced a calm smile. We're just figuring out some grown-up stuff, nothing for you to worry about. Go wash up for dinner, all right? Kevin hesitated, clearly uncertain, but eventually obeyed. Once he disappeared, Juliana turned back to Thomas. Listen, we have an appointment with Beth on Friday, and she can tell us what to do about these calls. For now, just give me a chance to help you. She half expected him to protest, but he merely exhaled, nodding. They left it at that, the question of danger lingering unspoken but ever present. The next day, Thomas made several phone calls to track down details of the debt. Juliana had to work a back-to-back shift, so she left early and returned late, her body aching from hours of standing and endless patient care. By the time she got home, Kevin was asleep in his room, and Thomas was seated at the dining table, surrounded by scattered paperwork. A half-eaten sandwich lay forgotten on a plate nearby. I tried clarifying the claims, he said, looking up as she entered. Some collectors are legit, others, not so much. It's tangled, but I found mention of one organization that might be connected to my old partner's manipulations. He rubbed his temples wearily. I'm sorry, Juliana. You don't need this drama. Fatigue made her voice come out gentler than she intended. We'll handle it. I told you we're in this together now, at least until we figure out the next step. He mustered a faint smile. You never imagined bringing home a stray mechanic would get this complicated, did you? She shook her head, returning his smile with one that barely masked her concern. No, but I'd rather face the real story than wonder what might have happened to you out in the cold. In the following days, neighbors continued to request Thomas's help for minor fixes, occasionally handing him tips or small payments. He diligently put some aside, hoping to chip away at his debt. Yet each phone call from an unknown number set his nerves on edge. Twice, he stepped outside to answer in hushed tones, returning with troubled eyes. Juliana pretended not to overhear, but her heart pounded each time. Kevin, for his part, sensed the underlying tension. One evening, he brought Thomas a glass of water while he worked, quietly asking, "Are you in trouble, Thomas? Is that why Mom is worried?" Thomas placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder, his voice low. "Things are complicated, kid, but I'm working on it, okay? Your mom's helping me a lot." Kevin nodded slowly, seeming reassured, but there was a solemnity in his gaze that revealed he understood more than they gave him credit for. After he left, Thomas sat in silence for a long time, staring at the stack of papers that represented his tangled past. That night, as a light snow fell outside, Juliana curled up on the couch, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She pictured angry men in black coats pounding on her door, or menacing phone calls demanding money she didn't have. She wondered if she'd made a mistake by inviting Thomas in. Yet despite the fear, a deeper sense of resolve welled up within her. For better or worse, she had made a choice to open her door and her heart to this man. Now she would have to stand by that decision, no matter what shadows began to close in. Sleet lashed against the windows of Juliana's home, creating a drumming sound that filled the quiet living room. Thomas sat hunched over a small stack of envelopes, sorting through bills and old legal documents, while Juliana watched from the couch. She rubbed her temples, feeling the day's fatigue pressing on her. "I can't believe how many calls you've gotten this week," she said softly. "And not just from typical creditors. Some of them sound more like thugs than debt collectors." Thomas exhaled and set aside a notice stamped with bright red letters. "I've heard threats before," he replied, "but it's different now that I'm not alone. I don't want you or Kevin to be in danger." From the hallway, Kevin peeked around the corner. He was supposed to be finishing homework, but he had a knack for sensing tension. Juliana caught his eye and gave him a gentle nod, silently assuring him she had the situation under control. Hesitantly, he disappeared back into his room. The phone rang, startling both of them. Thomas glanced at it warily, but Juliana insisted on picking it up. "Hello?" she answered. her voice measured. A pause followed. She mouthed the word creditor to Thomas, then mustered a polite yet firm tone. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Walker is in the process of sorting his affairs legally. Please direct all formal communication to our legal representative." When the person on the line spoke again, Juliana's expression hardened. Threatening people isn't going to solve anything. She hung up, her hand trembling. "They said they'd stop by in person if we don't pay soon," she muttered. "Beth needs to hear about this. It's getting out of hand." Thomas gripped the edge of the table. "Let's call her first thing in the morning." The next day, Juliana made good on that plan. She spoke with Beth, who listened intently, her calm professionalism reassuring. "These tactics are borderline harassment," Beth stated. "I'll file an immediate cease and desist, but if this is tied to any criminal element, like your old business partner's associates, legal papers alone might not stop them." Thomas overheard the conversation, his face pale. Still, he nodded in agreement as Beth gave instructions to record all calls, keep written notes, and alert authorities if anyone suspicious showed up. A knot of worry formed in Juliana's stomach. She'd never imagined opening her home to a stranger would lead to potential confrontations with dangerous people. Yet despite the anxiety, she sensed a collective determination building between her, Thomas, and Beth. They wouldn't let threats derail their progress. That afternoon, Thomas continued working on small repair jobs in the neighborhood. Bill Carmichael's sister needed help with her malfunctioning washing machine, and a local bartender wanted his old truck inspected. Word of Thomas's skill had spread, and a few people offered him modest sums for his time, which he diligently set aside for possible legal fees. Although these gestures lifted his spirits, a shadow lingered over every task, the fear that at any moment an unwelcome figure might appear demanding money. Late in the evening, Lorraine dropped by. She looked around the living room with concern, taking in the tense atmosphere. "I heard about the calls," she said gently. "I wanted to see if you two needed anything." Juliana felt a wave of relief. "I'm glad you're here. It's been a rough couple of days. We're filing all the paperwork Beth asked for, but it feels like we're racing against time." Lorraine pursed her lips. "I can't say I know much about dealing with that kind of intimidation, but if you need a safe place to stay, especially for Kevin, my home is always open." Thomas thanked her, clearly moved. "We appreciate the offer more than you know. If it gets to that point, we'll let you know." After Lorraine left, Juliana busied herself with cleaning up the kitchen, trying to soothe her frayed nerves by focusing on mundane tasks. From the other side of the counter, Thomas folded a dish towel and cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Every day I stay here seems to bring you more trouble." She turned off the faucet and faced him. "We've come too far to turn back now. I won't pretend I'm not scared, I am. But you're doing everything you can to make things right. You have a plan with Beth, you're working odd jobs, and we're documenting each threat. We just need to hold on." He nodded, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and lingering guilt. Outside, the sleet changed to snow, large flakes drifting beneath the streetlights. The storm within the house seemed just as relentless, each day bringing new challenges, but they clung to hope. They had no choice but to keep facing each trial, determined to outrun the shadows of Thomas's past and safeguard the fragile sense of family they had formed in this house. Wind rattled the thin panes of Juliana's windows as she returned from yet another grueling shift at St. Mary's. Her feet ached, and her mind buzzed with thoughts of the calls, the bills, and the possibility of danger looming. Stepping inside, she found the living room unusually quiet, lit only by a single lamp. Thomas was seated at the small desk where Juliana normally organized her mail. He looked up, startled, as if he'd been lost in thought. She noticed a half-filled notebook on the desk and lines of handwriting that looked hurried, some parts scratched out. "Everything okay?" she asked, removing her scarf. He nodded curtly, capping a pen and setting it aside. "Just writing down some things. Sometimes it helps me get my head straight to put stuff on paper." Juliana sensed he was holding back. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas laced his fingers together, resting his arms on the desk. "I've been going back and forth about my ex-partner, Dwight. He owes me as much as I owe him, if you consider the business we built together. But in the eyes of the law, it's all tangled. It makes me question whether I should confront him directly." She removed her coat, draping it over a nearby chair. "Confront him how?" "There's a part of me that wants to meet with him, see if we can reach some kind of settlement without risking more harassment," Thomas said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But Beth warned me that dealing with him directly could be dangerous." Juliana weighed the idea. "Dwight's the one who threatened you before, right? The one with questionable tactics. Is it worth the risk, considering everything we've been through?" His eyes flicked to the floor. "I don't know. This might be the fastest route to settle, but it's definitely not the safest." She leaned against the back of the couch, arms crossed. "It sounds like you're torn between taking a shortcut and following Beth's legal path. But if Dwight is the type to use muscle and intimidation, going to him alone might escalate things." He gave a weary nod. "Yeah, I guess I was hoping for a miracle solution." Footsteps approached from the hallway, and Kevin appeared, hugging a book to his chest. He cast them both a curious look. "You guys look worried again," he said, his voice tinged with concern beyond his years. "Are those people still bothering you, Thomas?" Thomas offered a reassuring smile. "We're trying to figure out the best way to deal with them, buddy. It's nothing you need to worry about, okay?" Kevin wasn't convinced. He gripped the book tighter. I hate seeing you both upset. Ever since Thomas came, it's been nicer here, like I have someone else to talk to, but then these people started calling." His words trailed off. Juliana felt her heart ache at the earnestness in Kevin's eyes. She reached out, gently rubbing his shoulder. "We'll sort it out, Kev. It might take time, but we'll figure it out." After Kevin headed back to his room, Thomas sank into the living room chair. A heavy sigh escaped him. "I feel guilty. You two were doing fine before I showed up." She sat on the edge of the couch. "We weren't fine," she corrected gently. "I was juggling too much. Kevin was lonely, and the house was falling apart. Yes, we've got new problems, but at least now we're facing them together." He looked at her, gratitude softening the tension in his face. "I guess I never thought I'd find something that feels like a family again, even if it's just temporary." Silence settled between them, comfortable yet charged with emotion. Juliana wanted to say more, but she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to define what their bond might be. Instead, she nodded toward the half-filled notebook on the desk. "Keep writing if it helps," she offered, "but promise me you won't do anything risky without talking to Beth first." Thomas closed the notebook, meeting her gaze. "I promise," he said quietly. "I owe you that much. I owe Kevin that much." She stood, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. "I'm going to check on Kevin, then head to bed." "We can talk more tomorrow, okay?" He agreed, and as she moved down the hallway, she heard him flip the notebook open again. It struck her that for all his mechanical skill and resourcefulness, Thomas was as vulnerable as she'd ever been. Maybe more so. Their dilemmas had merged into a single conflict, and the moral weight of each decision pressed on them both. Whether they took the direct route or the legal route, they would have to be ready for whatever blowback came next. Juliana stirred awake to the sound of her phone buzzing against the nightstand. Outside, the sky was still dark, and a winter moon cast a faint glow across her bedroom floor. Her heart thumped anxiously as she reached for the device, squinting at the screen. Another unknown number. She let it go to voicemail and sank back against her pillow, aware that her chances of sleep were gone. Morning brought a subdued atmosphere. The voicemail was nothing new. Anonymous threats demanding money, hinting they knew where Thomas was living. Juliana replayed the message in her mind as she made breakfast, stirring scrambled eggs with a wooden spoon. She fought to keep her voice light while talking to Kevin, who sat at the table finishing math homework he hadn't completed the night before. Thomas eventually emerged from the hall, eyes shadowed from lack of rest. He mumbled a greeting, poured himself a mug of coffee, and settled into a chair. Kevin showed him a few math problems, and Thomas tried to help, but his distracted mind was elsewhere. After Kevin left for school, Juliana and Thomas listened to the voicemail together, hearing the coarse voice hiss words like "pay up" and "you'll regret it," twisted her stomach. Thomas played it again, this time putting it on speaker so they could catch every detail. He then hit pause, lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not Dwight's voice," he observed, "but I'm sure it's connected to him. Probably someone he hired or someone who stands to benefit from my debt." Juliana set a hand on his shoulder. "We'll show this to Beth. Maybe she can push for a harassment case or at least get the police involved." A defeated laugh escaped him. "The police? I've never had much luck with them. They see me as a guy who ran from his problems. I just hope they'll take this seriously." The weight of impending confrontation hung thickly in the air. Despite Beth's ongoing efforts, it felt as though they were trapped, unable to push back against a threat that tiptoed around the edges of legality. Juliana wished she could wave a magic wand and vanish every debt, every trace of Thomas's past. Yet they were stuck with the slow, grinding reality of bureaucracies and legal processes. Later that day, Thomas tried to bury himself in mechanical work. He visited a neighbor's garage to fix a broken snowblower belt. While there, he caught a glimpse of a dark SUV idling at the far end of the street. Something about it made the hairs on his neck stand up. The driver's window was tinted, offering no view of who might be inside. Thomas hurried with the repairs, uneasy until the SUV finally drove away. When he returned to Juliana's house, she saw the troubled look in his eyes even before he said a word. "I spotted someone," he muttered. "Could be a coincidence, but maybe not." Her face paled. "Thomas, we can't ignore that. We should talk to the police now." He turned away, pacing the living room. "They might not do anything unless a clear crime is committed. And if this is Dwight or his associates, me going to the cops could escalate it." By the time Kevin got home, the tension was palpable. Juliana managed to maintain a semblance of normalcy, asking about his day, checking his homework, and offering leftovers for dinner, but fear gnawed at her. Every time headlights passed the house, she tensed, half expecting a confrontation at the door. That evening, Lorraine dropped by again, this time with groceries and an empathetic ear. Juliana explained the SUV sighting and the threatening calls, her voice trembling. Lorraine's brow furrowed with worry. "You know, I have a friend in the local precinct. He can't perform miracles, but maybe he can at least keep an eye on the neighborhood." Thomas looked torn between gratitude and shame. "I appreciate it, really, but I hate feeling like I'm dragging you all into my mess." "It's not just your mess anymore," Juliana interjected. "We're all involved now." Lorraine took out her phone, stepping into the hallway to make a call. After a quick, hushed conversation, she returned, offering a nod. "He can't promise constant surveillance, but he'll pass the info along. Just keep your eyes open and document everything." A knock at the door jolted them all. Juliana's breath caught in her throat, but it was only Bill Carmichael stopping by to discuss a possible, bigger car repair job for Thomas. The innocent request temporarily eased the tension, though the door closing behind Bill felt like slamming the lid back on a simmering pot. Night settled in once again, with the wind howling outside. Kevin went to bed, hugging his mother a bit tighter than usual. Juliana lingered in the living room, gazing out the window at the street. She noticed every parked car, every flicker of movement, every shift in the shadows. It felt like an insurmountable barrier had risen between them and the peaceful life they once had. Thomas eventually joined her, standing silently at her side. In that moment, both realized how high the stakes truly were. Even with a growing circle of friends and neighbors, the threat loomed large. They stood on the brink of something that might require more than just hope and legal counsel. The time for major decisions that could change their lives entirely, was coming fast. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains in Juliana's kitchen the following morning, offering a brief sense of optimism. The day felt unusually bright after a string of overcast skies. She made coffee and handed Thomas a cup. He accepted it silently, eyes still showing remnants of last night's worries. They had a scheduled meeting with Beth that afternoon. Kevin was at school, which allowed them to tackle the situation head-on without worrying about his reactions. Thomas leafed through a folder of documents one final time, a determined set to his jaw. "We might get some good news today," he said, almost as though trying to convince himself. They arrived at the legal aid office, a nondescript building with a small sign that read Community Legal Services. Beth greeted them warmly, directing them into a cramped office lined with overstuffed filing cabinets. She took her seat behind a well-worn wooden desk and beckoned them to sit. "I've been working on your case," Beth began, sliding her reading glasses on. "Thomas, I have some leads on who might be backing those hostile phone calls. There's a possibility we can file a protective order if we can prove these threats are connected to your ex-partner. It's not a foolproof shield, but it's a start." Thomas leaned forward, relief mixing with skepticism. "That's more than I expected," Beth nodded. "There's more. I spoke with a financial counselor who's willing to see if you qualify for a structured settlement to handle the valid portion of your debt. If your ex-partner is truly behind some of the fraudulent charges, we might have grounds to dispute them entirely. This is going to take time, though." Juliana released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Time is fine," she said. "We just need to know we're not cornered." With professional efficiency, Beth flipped through several papers, highlighting sections for them to read. She outlined steps to file harassment complaints, possible negotiation points with legitimate creditors, and a cautious plan to confront the fraudulent claims. Thomas absorbed the information quietly, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. Juliana maintained a supportive presence by his side, feeling a glimmer of optimism. When the meeting concluded, Beth gave them both a firm handshake. "I'm on your side. Keep me updated, and don't hesitate to call if anything new happens. Harassment isn't something you have to face alone." Outside, the crisp winter air stung their faces, but they shared a tentative smile. Thomas clutched the folder of documents as if it were a lifeline. "It's not a full victory," he said, "but it's a step in the right direction." They decided to grab lunch at a small cafe near the legal aid office, a quiet place with mismatched tables and chairs. The smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee soothed their nerves. After ordering sandwiches, they took a seat by a window that framed the snowy street. For the first time in days, Juliana felt a modicum of peace. "This is good news," she insisted, sensing Thomas's lingering doubts. "We finally have a legal strategy. No, it won't be easy, but at least there's a framework." He bit into his sandwich, nodding slowly. "I know. It's just hard to believe that I might get out from under this someday. I've been running for so long that it's become normal." She reached out, resting a hand on his arm. "You're not alone anymore. I'm here, And I have a feeling this community will support you when they understand the truth." His shoulders relaxed at her words. A faint smile touched his lips. "You've done so much for me already. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I hope, once all this is behind me, I can do something real for you and Kevin, something that matters." Juliana nodded, appreciating the sincerity in his voice. "You already have. I've seen Kevin open up more since you arrived. The house is in better shape, and believe it or not, you've helped me see the importance of letting others in. I'm not the only one who can fix everything." Their conversation lingered in that hopeful space. As they finished their meal, they talked about small things, ideas for repairing a neighbor's garage door, Kevin's upcoming science fair, and Lorraine's unwavering support. The mention of Lorraine reminded them that they had allies in this fight, both professional and personal. Stepping out of the cafe, they braced themselves against the cold wind. The sense of unity they felt in that moment buoyed their spirits. The threat still loomed, but for the first time, they could envision a future beyond fear and debt. It might be a rocky road, but at least it no longer seemed impossible. They decided to head home, eager to share cautious good news with Kevin, who would be returning from school soon. On the drive, the tension of the past few days didn't magically dissolve, but Juliana noticed a subtle change in Thomas's posture. He sat a little taller, breathed a little easier. She found herself mirroring that feeling, determined to keep this flicker of hope alive. In the following days, the winter sun shone with surprising brightness, reflecting off the thick snow in dazzling bursts of light. The city streets remained icy, and local news stations warned residents to stay cautious. Yet inside Juliana's house, a slow sense of purpose emerged. Each new day brought them closer to implementing Beth's plan, and each day also seemed to invite fresh challenges. One afternoon, Thomas arrived back from an appliance repair job with a thoughtful look on his face. "I've been thinking about investing some of the money I earn into basic parts," he explained to Juliana. "I can't open a full garage, but maybe I can upgrade my tools so I can handle more complex jobs here in the driveway." Juliana was flipping through her own stack of documents. Legal forms Beth had asked her to complete regarding her mortgage and credit card debt. She glanced up. "That could be smart, but make sure it doesn't interfere with the debts we're trying to resolve." He smiled ruefully. "I won't go overboard, I promise. Just enough to do decent repairs. It might help us earn more in the long run." The phone rang, and both of them froze. Lately, every call brought a jolt of anxiety. Juliana picked it up cautiously. To her relief, it was Lorraine. After a brief chat, Juliana put the phone on speaker so Thomas could listen too. Lorraine's voice brimmed with encouragement. "I talked to my friend in the precinct. He says they haven't noticed any suspicious vehicles cruising around lately, so maybe that SUV was just passing through. Still, he recommends keeping an eye on things." Thomas exhaled, tension ebbing slightly. "That's a relief, though I'll stay alert," Lorraine continued. "Also, one of the residents in my building is looking for someone to fix her son's car. I told her about you. She might call later." They thanked Lorraine and hung up. It felt good to know people were in their corner, even if their problems were far from solved. That evening, Kevin joined them in the living room for a mini brainstorm session, as he called it. He'd scrawled the word "plan" across a piece of poster board, determined to help. It warmed Juliana's heart to see him trying to be part of the solution, even if it was more of a playful gesture than a real strategic plan. Thomas crouched beside Kevin, pointing at a doodle of a car. "That's Dad's old truck," Kevin explained. "I used to wish we could fix it, but we sold it after the divorce. Anyway, maybe we can fix other people's trucks. Then we can earn money and pay off all the bills." Juliana gave an affectionate laugh, smoothing Kevin's hair. "If only it were that simple. But you're on the right track." Thomas patted Kevin's shoulder. "You've got the spirit of an inventor and a dreamer. Don't lose that." Soon after, Kevin went to bed, leaving Juliana and Thomas to sort the adult-sized problems. They reviewed the forms Beth had sent, itemized lists of debts, official letters to creditors, and a preliminary statement for the harassment complaint. It was all deeply bureaucratic, but each piece of paperwork felt like a step toward reclaiming their peace. "Once we file these," Juliana mused, "there's no turning back. We're basically announcing ourselves. Dwight or whoever he's hired will realize we're serious about fighting this." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Let them know. I'm done hiding. I want to face this head on, even if it's scary." They worked until late, drafting emails and organizing digital copies. The sense of shared purpose grew stronger with every page they read. Around midnight, they finally set aside the folders. Juliana brewed chamomile tea, and they sipped quietly at the kitchen table. "Thank you for sticking with me," Thomas said, his voice hushed in the stillness. "I can't shake the feeling that I'm jeopardizing everything you've built here." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Thomas, it's true that I'm taking a risk, but life was never easy, even before you came. I've realized there's a difference between carrying burdens alone and sharing them with someone who actually cares." He met her gaze, a mix of gratitude and vulnerability in his expression. For a moment, the gravity of their situation lifted, replaced by a quiet intimacy that neither tried to name. The old radiator hissed, and the clock on the wall ticked steadily, as if reminding them of the time they had to cherish these calm moments. They finished their tea, rinsed the cups, and shut off the lights. Even though the threat of retaliation lingered, they went to bed with a sense of resolve that felt new. The next day would bring more paperwork, possibly more phone calls, and the ever-present tension of an uncertain future. But for now, in the hush of the snowy night, they allowed themselves to believe they might finally be on the brink of turning the tide. A biting cold snap descended upon Cleveland, turning the streets into sheets of ice and frosting the rooftops with glistening crystals. The nights grew darker faster, an effect that felt emblematic of the heightened tension in Juliana's household. She and Thomas proceeded with Beth's plan, gathering records, filing the necessary paperwork, and laying the groundwork for a serious legal push against the persistent threats. Yet despite the steady progress, a restlessness colored each day, as though they were awaiting an oncoming storm. One evening, Juliana returned home from an extended shift at the hospital, her cheeks flushed from a brisk walk through icy winds. She set her purse down in the living room and listened for sounds of Kevin or Thomas, finding instead an unexpected hush. A moment later, Thomas emerged from the hallway, his expression guarded. "Where's Kevin?" she asked, slipping off her gloves. "He's at Lorraine's," Thomas replied, subdued. "He went over after school to work on a project with her niece." He hesitated, then continued, "Juliana, there's been news." Her heart gave a lurch. "What kind of news?" Thomas gestured for her to sit on the sofa. He took a seat beside her, keeping a few inches of space between them, as if uncertain how close to be. "I got a call from Dwight's associate, or at least someone claiming to represent him. They're proposing a face-to-face meeting." An immediate wave of apprehension swept over her. "Did you tell Beth?" "I tried. She wasn't in her office, so I left a message." Thomas let out a tense breath. "This person said Dwight's willing to drop certain debts if I agree to talk. No mention of how or when, only that I should be ready to meet soon. It smells like a trap." Juliana rubbed her eyes, exhausted and worried all at once. "It could be a negotiation tactic, or something more sinister. You're not actually considering meeting with him, are you?" Thomas ran a hand through his grey-streaked hair. "I don't know. Part of me wants to end this once and for all, but I remember Beth's warning. If Dwight's behind the intimidation, he might try anything to shut me up or strong-arm me. She clasped her hands tightly. Then you wait for Beth to call back. We do this the legal way. He nodded, though his eyes flickered with uncertainty. I won't make a move without talking to her first. They lapsed into uneasy silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the radiator struggling against the cold. Juliana rose, pacing to the window to peer out at the dimly lit street. Her breath fogged the pain as she leaned in. You think this is some ruse to corner you? Possibly, Thomas replied. Dwight was always about power plays. He'd do anything to keep people off balance. A knock at the door startled them both, and Juliana's heart thudded in her chest. She placed a hand over it, willing it to calm. Thomas rose, gesturing for her to stay back as he approached the door. Relief flooded him when he saw Kevin's familiar silhouette through the peephole. Kevin came in, stomping snow from his boots, and sensed the tension immediately. Everything okay? He asked, voice soft. Juliana forced a smile. We're just stressed about some news. Nothing you need to worry about right now, Kev. He eyed them both skeptically, but nodded. I'll go finish my reading for school, he said, disappearing down the hallway toward his bedroom. After his door shut, Juliana sank onto the sofa once more, feeling the weight of their precarious situation. She craved a simple resolution, some official notice that Dwight's claims had been dismissed or that the intimidation would stop. But the real world rarely offered such neat endings. Thomas stepped closer, his voice low. I'm sorry. This is exactly the kind of situation I wanted to avoid. But it feels like no matter how carefully we proceed, Dwight keeps forcing a crisis. Maybe Beth can coordinate something safer, Juliana murmured, rubbing her arms as if to ward off a chill. Like a mediated discussion where you're not alone with him. Thomas exhaled, his breath uneven. I just want to be free of this. I want to be able to save money for a real place of my own. Maybe open a small garage again and stop dragging you into danger. She turned to face him, catching a hint of desperation in his eyes. I never asked for a perfect life, Thomas. I just want Kevin to be safe and for you to resolve your past. Maybe this meeting is a step we have to consider, but not without Beth. Promise me you'll wait to speak with her. He nodded solemnly. I promise. They talked a little while longer, going in circles about what the next few days might bring. Finally, the phone buzzed, and both reached for it, hearts racing. It was a text from Beth, too short to be comforting. Got your message. Call in the morning. It offered no solution, only further waiting. Thomas placed the phone on the coffee table and gave Juliana a tired glance. Looks like we brace ourselves overnight. She managed a faint nod, mind crowded with worst-case scenarios. Even as she tried to remain calm for Kevin's sake, she couldn't quell the fear that the confrontation they had long dreaded was closing in. For better or worse, the storm loomed on the horizon, promising a reckoning none of them could ignore. The next morning arrived with a dull grey sky and streets still slick from the night's snowfall. Juliana woke early, restless with anticipation. While Kevin snoozed in his room, she lingered in the kitchen, waiting for Beth's promised call. Even the sputtering coffee maker seemed to whine in tune with her nerves. At precisely 8, her phone vibrated. She snatched it up and recognized Beth's number, quickly putting it on speaker so Thomas could listen too. Beth, it's Juliana. Thanks for getting back to us. Beth's crisp voice filled the kitchen. Thomas told me about Dwight's invitation to meet. I strongly advise against going in blind. If Dwight wants to talk, I can request a mediated session in a neutral setting, a lawyer's office, or even a courthouse if necessary. Thomas leaned toward the phone. He didn't give a location or time, just said he'd be in touch. I've been ignoring strange calls, hoping to filter out the threats. Beth sighed audibly. Well, keep ignoring them if they can't provide a legitimate solution. In the meantime, I'm pushing forward with the fraud claim. We've got enough evidence that Dwight manipulated records. Once the paperwork is official, he'll be the one under pressure. That might force him to negotiate fairly, or drive him to more desperate measures. A knot of tension twisted in Juliana's stomach. So we should be ready for anything. Unfortunately, yes, Beth replied. Stay vigilant. Keep documenting every contact. If you get any messages demanding you meet at some out-of-the-way place, call the police first. They might not do much preemptively, but it's better to have a record. I'll also let the local precinct know we suspect intimidation. Thomas exchanged a glance with Juliana. They both felt a rush of conflicting relief and apprehension. Thank you, Juliana told Beth. We appreciate you guiding us through this. After the call ended, they sat quietly around the small kitchen table. Kevin stirred in the other room, soon padding into the kitchen. He took in their somber expressions and sighed. Is this about Dwight again? Juliana hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but we're handling it. Kevin pulled out a chair, joining them. Can I help? I can skip after-school stuff if you need me around. Thomas mustered a faint smile. You're helping just by being you, kid. Focus on your homework and staying safe. We've got the grown-up side covered. Somehow, that felt insufficient to Juliana, who saw how Kevin's eyes lingered on them, filled with concern that no child his age should have to bear. She tousled his hair gently, silently promising him that they'd see this through. After a quick breakfast, Kevin headed to school and Juliana prepared for work, leaving Thomas with instructions to stay alert. The hospital shift passed in a hazy blur for Juliana. Her normally efficient focus was scattered by visions of phone calls or unexpected knocks at her door. Several times, Lorraine caught her staring into space, and each time, Juliana gave a half-hearted smile of reassurance. Eventually, she found a moment in the break room to fill Lorraine in on Beth's advice. We're basically on high alert, Juliana explained. Thomas might have to meet with Dwight in some official capacity. Lorraine shook her head, tapping her foot anxiously on the linoleum floor. I just wish there was a clear resolution. It's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You know I'm here for you, both of you. Thanks, Juliana said, swallowing the lump in her throat. The reminder that she wasn't alone offered some solace. How's your friend in the precinct? Any updates? He says no new reports of suspicious activity. But that doesn't mean Dwight won't find a way to corner Thomas, Lorraine replied. Just stay safe, okay? When her shift finally ended, dusk had already fallen. Cleveland's sky was a moody mix of lavender and slate gray, the streetlights flickering to life as she navigated the icy roads home. She braced herself upon arriving, half expecting some sign of forced entry or an unfamiliar car parked nearby. Instead, the yard was calm, and inside she found Kevin completing his homework at the living room table, while Thomas tinkered with a toaster in the kitchen. Hey, Mom, Kevin said, relief evident in his eyes. I thought you'd be home later. Juliana set her keys on the side table. I got off on time for once. Anything new happen here? Thomas shut the toaster panel, turning to face her. Dwight's associate called again. I didn't answer, and they didn't leave a message. That's about it. Nothing in person. She nodded, exhaling. The fragile calm felt like the hush before an impending storm, intensifying her nerves. While Kevin finished his last math problem, Thomas confided in her that he'd begun drafting a statement about Dwight's involvement in the business fraud, hoping it would strengthen their upcoming legal case. They spent the rest of the evening in a subdued peace, quietly preparing dinner and exchanging minimal conversation. A subtle tension underscored every moment, a shared understanding that the next call or knock could change their lives in an instant. It felt as though they'd come to the brink of a climax, One final test of their resolve was looming, whether they were ready for it or not. As night settled in and Kevin went to sleep, Juliana and Thomas faced each other in the dimly lit living room. Their eyes conveyed the same lingering question: how long until Dwight makes his move? Neither had an answer, but both recognized that when morning came, they would be one step closer to confronting whatever fate awaited them. Early the next morning, Juliana woke to the hiss of the old radiator and the gentle hum of activity in the kitchen. She rose, tying a robe around herself, and stepped out to find Thomas frying eggs for Kevin, who was diligently pouring cereal into a bowl. The scene had become a comforting familiarity in recent weeks, Thomas moving around the small space with quiet confidence, Kevin looking up to him with unspoken admiration. "Morning," Juliana greeted, stifling a yawn. She noticed how Kevin's eyes sparkled at the aroma of the sizzling eggs. Thomas acknowledged her with a warm nod, then served a plate of scrambled eggs. "Figured we could all use a decent breakfast today," he said. "Big day ahead?" Kevin munched on cereal, his brow furrowed. "You're meeting with Beth again?" Juliana reached for a mug in the cupboard. "Yes, she's going to file more paperwork to finalize the fraud complaint. And we might discuss if—" She shot Thomas a cautious glance. "Well, if we need an official meeting with Dwight." Thomas set the frying pan aside and turned to them. "Beth mentioned that once the fraud complaint is logged, Dwight will be notified. That could provoke him. We have to be ready." Juliana filled her mug with coffee and inhaled the strong aroma, letting it calm her nerves. She glanced at Kevin's worried expression. "It'll be fine, Kev. This is the path we've chosen. We either let Dwight walk all over us, or we stand up for ourselves." He bobbed his head, though she could see the tension in the way he held his cereal spoon. Kevin finished up and went to gather his school things, leaving her and Thomas a moment alone in the kitchen. Thomas lowered his voice. "I'm worried he'll come here, demanding answers. If he does, we'll call the police," Juliana interjected firmly. "No more running." "That's what Beth said we should do, and I agree." His shoulders relaxed fractionally. "All right, I'll keep my phone nearby at all times." Despite the apprehension, they carried on with their day. Juliana dropped Kevin off at school, then she and Thomas headed to the courthouse district downtown to meet Beth. Icy wind whipped between the tall buildings, and they clutched their coats tightly as they entered the warm lobby of a government office. Beth greeted them with her characteristic efficiency. "Glad you could make it. I have the complaint forms ready for your signatures," she said, motioning for them to sit at a long table scattered with paperwork. "After this is processed, Dwight will receive a formal notice. At that point, he's legally required to respond." Thomas examined the documents, a mixture of resolve and anxiety in his eyes. "How long will it take?" Beth pressed her lips together. "It varies. A week, maybe 2, for him to get the official notice, but he could hear through other channels sooner. If he's determined to confront you outside of the legal system, he might do it before any formal hearing." Juliana felt a chill. "We'll keep alert. Is there anything else we can do to protect ourselves?" Beth nodded. "If you feel threatened, file a restraining order. It's not a magic shield, but it provides grounds for police intervention if he tries to come near you or your property." Thomas signed the forms, each stroke of the pen feeling like a commitment to a new future. When Juliana added her signature, she felt a flutter in her stomach, part fear, part hope. She couldn't deny the surge of determination that coursed through her. For so long, she had shouldered troubles in silence. Now she was standing beside Thomas, forging a path to justice rather than retreat. After they left the building, the clouds overhead roiled in a distant, stormy sky, the sun struggling to break through. Thomas slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. "Thank you for doing this with me. You don't have to be here, but you are." Juliana stopped on the sidewalk, glancing up at him. "Thomas, this affects me too. Ever since I opened my door to you, our lives have been intertwined. The difference is, now we're facing everything openly." He offered a faint, genuine smile. "I never knew I could feel this kind of support again, like someone actually believes I'm worth the trouble." She gently rested a hand on his arm, noticing the soft lines of concern etched around his eyes. "Let's not call it trouble. Let's call it finding a way forward." They headed back to the car, each step echoing with a sense of finality. Tomorrow or next week, Dwight would learn about the fraud complaint, and the real confrontation would become inevitable. Juliana felt a tingle of fear, but also recognized something deeper taking root within her. She was no longer the exhausted single mother, merely surviving from shift to shift. She had discovered an unexpected well of strength, shaped by compassion, but tempered now by resilience. As they drove home, her thoughts drifted to Kevin and how all this would impact his life. She prayed that any fallout from Dwight's reaction would be minimal. She also recalled the timid nurse she once was, too focused on her own burdens to help anyone else in such a risky way. Meeting Thomas had transformed her, awakening a courage she never knew she possessed. No matter what trials lay ahead, she wouldn't retreat back into her shell of self-preservation. They reached the driveway, the front porch light flickering in the encroaching dusk. Closing the car door, Thomas took a steadying breath. Juliana gave him a small nod, and together they stepped inside, bracing themselves for the next wave of the unknown. In the days that followed, a thick tension gathered in every corner of the house. Juliana checked the mail each afternoon with bated breath, half expecting a furious letter from Dwight or more ominous threats. Thomas divided his time between taking on minor repair jobs around the neighborhood and obsessively watching his phone. At any moment, they expected a call or an unannounced visit that would shatter their precarious calm. Kevin sensed the mounting unease despite their best efforts to shield him. He spent more time in his room, headphones on, likely escaping into video games or schoolwork to avoid the grown-up problems swirling around him. Juliana noticed how he occasionally ventured out, looking pale and anxious, only to retreat again when the vibe in the living room became too intense. On a crisp Saturday morning, Thomas decided to tackle a significant car repair for Bill Carmichael, who had offered decent pay in exchange. "This is the biggest job I've had in weeks," he told Juliana, donning his warmest jacket and gloves. "It'll take me most of the day to finish, but the money should help cover some immediate bills or legal fees." She walked him to the driveway, noticing how his breath formed white puffs in the chilly air. "Be careful," she murmured. "Dwight could show up anywhere, especially if he knows you're out and about." Thomas nodded, determination lining his face. "I'll keep my eyes open." He headed off, leaving Juliana and Kevin in the quiet house. She glanced at the living room clock, which seemed to tick louder than usual. Needing distraction, she busied herself cleaning the kitchen, organizing cupboards, and tidying up random clutter. Eventually, a buzzing sound startled her, the phone. With her heart pounding, she rushed to check the caller ID. It was Beth. She answered with a tremor in her voice. "Beth? Is something wrong?" Beth's voice was calm but urgent. "I've just been notified that Dwight officially received the fraud complaint. His lawyer contacted me, claiming Dwight wants a settlement meeting, but the tone was interesting. They said he's insisting on seeing Thomas in person." Juliana swallowed hard. "Did they mention a location?" "Not yet. They'll propose something soon. I need you to warn Thomas. This could be a legitimate negotiation or a trap. Either way, you shouldn't go without legal representation present." She thanked Beth and hung up, her mind spinning. Without hesitation, she dialed Thomas's phone. It rang several times before he answered over the noise of whirring tools and clanking metal. I'm under a truck right now, he said, breathing heavily. What's going on? She relayed Beth's update. He was silent for a moment before replying, Okay, I'll wrap things up here as soon as I can. Then we'll talk. By evening, Thomas returned with smudges of grease on his jacket and an unsettled look in his eyes. They convened at the kitchen table with Kevin reading in the next room. Juliana explained everything Beth had told her. She says Dwight's lawyer might reach out about a meeting. We should only accept if it's official, with attorneys present. Thomas clenched his jaw. That's likely the best route. But I know Dwight. He might push for something outside official channels. That's when things get dangerous. They pored over the possibilities, going in circles about how best to respond. Each scenario carried risks. Finally, Kevin poked his head into the kitchen, timid but determined. You guys keep talking about this. Are we in danger right now? Juliana gestured for him to join them at the table. Kevin, we're trying to settle an argument about money and mistakes made in the past. It's complicated, but we're using the law to protect us. Kevin's gaze shifted from his mom to Thomas. Is that why you can't open your own garage yet? Because of this Dwight guy? Thomas nodded, meeting Kevin's eyes steadily. That's part of it. Once I clear my name, I can start fresh. So, I don't have to worry about, people showing up to hurt us. Juliana exchanged a glance with Thomas before responding softly. We're doing everything we can to keep that from happening. We have a lawyer, and the police know about the threats. It's scary, but we're not alone. Kevin exhaled, relief mixed with lingering worry. Okay, just promise you'll tell me if something's gonna happen. I don't like feeling like I'm in the dark. Thomas ruffled Kevin's hair, something he did more often these days. Promise, he said simply, his voice gentle. After Kevin left the kitchen, Juliana and Thomas returned to their quiet strategizing. Before the night was over, Beth's email arrived, stating that Dwight's lawyer proposed a meeting at a neutral conference room in a downtown office complex. The day and time were open-ended, awaiting Thomas's agreement. Reading the words, Juliana felt both dread and resolve. The countdown to the final confrontation had begun. She and Thomas stared at each other, the weight of the situation clear. Accepting the meeting would mean stepping onto a stage where Dwight could attempt any maneuver, legal or otherwise. Refusing the meeting, however, risked losing any leverage they had. After months of evasion and intimidation, they were finally in a position to confront the source of their fear. The question remained, would the confrontation bring justice and closure, or unleash even greater danger? The next morning arrived cold and crisp, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. Juliana stood by the front window, cradling a mug of tea. Her mind circled around the looming decision about Dwight's proposed meeting. Thomas emerged from the hallway, showered and dressed, though visibly weighed down by uncertainty. I spoke with Beth again, he announced quietly, joining her at the window. She can arrange a secure location if we do this officially. There'd be an officer present in case things go sideways, and we'd have a clear record of everything said. Juliana took a sip of tea, feeling it warm her throat. That sounds like the safest route. Has Dwight's lawyer agreed? Thomas rubbed the back of his neck. They haven't refused it, but they keep hinting that Dwight might want a private word with me first. Beth insists that's out of the question. She nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Good. You deserve protection. You didn't ask for this mess. Kevin, still in pajamas, padded into the living room, blinking sleepily. He glanced between them, picking up on the serious vibe as always. Are you guys going to meet Dwight soon? Juliana bent down and gave him a brief hug. We're working out details. Don't worry, Kev. Nothing's happening today. He yawned and shrugged. Okay. I'm going to watch TV for a bit. As Kevin headed off, Thomas let out a slow breath, and I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff. One step, and I could either find safety or plunge into chaos. You're not alone, Juliana reminded him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. If Dwight thinks he can corner you again, he'll find we're all standing behind you. Me, Kevin, Beth, Lorraine, we won't let him do this in secret. They lingered in that moment, hands connected, until a knock at the door made them jump. Exchanging a tense glance, Thomas approached cautiously. Through the peephole, he recognized Bill Carmichael's familiar bulk. "Morning, Bill," Thomas said, opening the door. Bill, bundled in a heavy coat, offered a polite nod. "Sorry to bother you so early. I just wanted to drop off your payment for the car job. I also wondered if you'd have time to take a look at my snowblower next week." Thomas glanced over his shoulder at Juliana, who gave a slight nod. "Sure, Bill. Thank you. I appreciate the steady work." Stepping inside to escape the cold, Bill rubbed his hands together. "Hey, I've been hearing rumors. Word is you're dealing with some rough folks, Thomas. Just want you to know, I've got your back. A lot of neighbors appreciate the work you've done. If someone's hassling you, don't be afraid to speak up." Gratitude filled Thomas's face. "Thanks, Bill. It's a complicated situation, but we're handling it. Means a lot to hear that kind of support." After Bill left, Juliana locked the door, turning to Thomas with a faint smile. "See, you have more allies than you realize." He nodded, pocketing the folded check. "Maybe that's what will get me through this, knowing I'm not fighting alone." They spent the remainder of the morning in a quiet routine. Juliana supervised Kevin's schoolwork, while Thomas organized tools in the garage, pondering the best strategy for upcoming repairs. The mundane tasks offered a welcome distraction from the swirling concerns about Dwight. Around lunchtime, Lorraine stopped by unannounced, a thermos of hot chocolate in hand. She wore a knitted beanie and gloves, face flushed from the cold. Settling in the living room with Juliana and Thomas, she quickly turned the conversation toward the pending showdown. "Heard anything new?" she asked, sipping from the thermos. "Dwight's lawyer wants a meeting," Juliana answered, "but we're insisting it be official and monitored. Beth's pushing for a formal setting. We're waiting to hear back." Lorraine's brow furrowed sympathetically. "You're handling this better than I would. I'd probably hide in a bunker until it was over." Thomas let out a dry chuckle. "Sometimes I think about that option. But I'm done hiding. I need to clear my name. I won't have a life otherwise." The three of them shared a loaded silence. Finally, Lorraine set the thermos down. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to check in. If you ever need backup, emotional or otherwise, you know where to find me." After she left, the day drifted toward evening. The sky outside turned a delicate rose gold, streaked with clouds that hinted at coming snow. Kevin finished his assignments and retreated to his room, leaving Juliana and Thomas to face the calm hush of early dusk. They sat side by side on the worn couch, each lost in thought. "Whatever happens," Thomas began softly, "I'm grateful for what you've done. You and Kevin. You've given me a sense of family I thought I'd lost forever." Juliana felt a swell of emotion, recalling how abruptly he'd entered her life, shivering in the cold on that fateful night. "Funny how a single moment of compassion can alter everything," she replied. Their eyes met in a mutual understanding that transcended the turmoil around them. Neither spoke of love directly, or even the shape their bond might take if they came through this unscathed. Yet the warmth in their gaze hinted at a closeness that defied easy explanation. They were no longer strangers, nor mere allies. They stood on the precipice of a deeper connection, as well as a reckoning that could shatter or solidify all they had built. In the soft glow of the living room lamp, they clasped hands, feeling each other's pulse, steady and strong. Tomorrow, next week, or perhaps even within hours, Dwight would force their hand, and they would be ready, not alone, but together, mustering every ounce of courage that had blossomed from the seeds of a simple act of kindness on a frigid Cleveland night. A hushed tension gripped Juliana from the moment she awoke. The sky was a clouded gray, and the air held an eerie stillness, as if Cleveland itself braced for what lay ahead. Today was the day of the official meeting with Dwight. After weeks of back and forth with lawyers and endless anxiety, the confrontation could no longer be postponed. Kevin ate breakfast in silence, buttering his toast with more concentration than usual. Juliana watched her son, noticing the worry etched across his features. She offered him a reassuring smile. "I'll drop you off at school. Then Thomas and I will head downtown. Everything will be okay, I promise." He nodded, trying to be brave. "Will you text me when it's over? Let me know you're safe." "Of course," she replied gently. "Try to focus on class. I'll see you this afternoon." By mid-morning, she and Thomas were on the road, heading to a corporate conference room Beth had secured. The building was modern and sleek, its lobby lined with tall glass windows overlooking the snowy streets. Beth greeted them at the reception area, dressed in a sharp grey suit and carrying a leather folder under her arm. A police officer in plain clothes lingered discreetly nearby, ready to step in if needed. "You both okay?" Beth asked, her eyes flicking from Juliana to Thomas. He gave a stiff nod. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's get this done." They took the elevator to the 12th floor, stepping out into a sterile hallway. The conference room door stood at the far end. Through the glass walls, Juliana spotted Dwight, a tall man in his 40s with a commanding posture. His dark hair was slicked back, and a barely concealed smugness curved his mouth. Another man, presumably Dwight's lawyer, sat beside him, tapping a pen against a notepad. Beth ushered Thomas and Juliana inside, introducing them formally. The tension thickened as Dwight's gaze landed on Thomas, a flicker of condescension crossing his face. Juliana settled into a chair next to Thomas, her heart hammering. She forced herself to breathe slowly, determined not to show fear. Dwight spoke first, his tone clipped. "I'm here under protest. My lawyer advised me to listen to your claims. I'm not admitting any wrongdoing, but I want to end this pointless back and forth." Beth cleared her throat. "Pointless? My client has evidence of fraudulent paperwork and intimidation attempts against him. The harassment alone is grounds for legal action." Dwight's lawyer leaned forward, adopting a measured tone. "We're open to a settlement if it spares both parties further legal battles. We need to hear what your client wants." Thomas's hand trembled slightly against the table. He clasped it with his other hand, taking a moment before speaking. "I want my name cleared," he said. "I want the false debts removed. I'll accept responsibility for what I legitimately owe, but you know as well as I do that much of this mess stems from manipulated contracts." Dwight's jaw tightened. "You think I'll let you off without paying your share? I had to cover losses when you vanished," Beth interjected calmly, sliding a folder across the table. "We have documentation showing money siphoned from the business account under Dwight's authority, transactions Thomas never approved." Dwight glowered, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. "Those were costs of operation," he muttered. "Not according to the forensic accountants," Beth countered. "Thomas is fully willing to repay any valid debts once the fraudulent sums are removed." "That's our position." Minutes stretched into a heated exchange of figures and pointed accusations. Several times, the plainclothes officer shifted in his seat, ready to intervene if tempers boiled over. Juliana watched with growing apprehension as Dwight's frustration mounted. His lawyer repeatedly calmed him, whispering advice. At one juncture, Dwight slammed a hand on the table, making Juliana flinch. "This is nonsense." "I kept that shop afloat for months while you ran off," Thomas met his stare. "I ran off because I was blindsided by lawsuits and threatened by goons. I'd have fought it back then if I'd known the extent of your lies." The tension peaked, and the officer cleared his throat, cautioning everyone to keep voices down. Beth pushed a piece of paper forward, a proposed settlement that recognized Thomas's partial liability but absolved him of the bulk of debt attributed to manipulations. Dwight's lawyer glanced over it, grimacing. After what felt like an eternity, Dwight heaved a sigh. "Fine," he growled. "If it means ending this circus, we'll sign under certain conditions." He tossed out demands about a payment schedule and disclaimers of further lawsuits. Beth negotiated each point with a clinical efficiency that left Dwight with fewer places to hide. Reluctant acceptance began to show on his face. At last, the two sides reached an agreement. It wasn't a glorious victory with fanfare, but it contained a path forward, protection from further harassment, and a legal framework for Thomas to settle legitimate debts. When Dwight scrawled his signature, an odd hush filled the room. Juliana's pulse pounded. She looked to Thomas, who quietly exhaled, as if releasing years of guilt and anger. Dwight shoved the papers at his own lawyer, then stood up, face stony. He spared a final glare at Thomas before stalking out, not even bothering to say goodbye. The officer stepped forward, quietly confirming the signatories. Beth gathered the documents, a hint of triumph in her eyes. "We'll get these filed immediately." "Congratulations, you're nearly free." Juliana reached for Thomas's hand, giving it a firm squeeze. A tidal wave of relief washed over her, mingled with exhaustion and the lingering echoes of Dwight's rage. They had survived the confrontation. No fists thrown, no dramatic meltdown, just a painstaking negotiation that ended with a legal remedy. Still, she sensed that neither she nor Thomas would walk away the same. Outside, the winter wind whipped across the sidewalk. They headed toward the car, hearts pounding with the realization that a significant chapter had closed. The wariness remained. Dwight's anger wouldn't vanish overnight, but the threat of losing everything had receded. A renewed sense of possibility budded within them, tempered by the vulnerability of all they had risked. 2 days after the tumultuous meeting, the legal documents were officially filed. While the threat of a sudden showdown with Dwight lingered in the background, the immediate storm had passed. Juliana felt a strange mixture of gratitude and emptiness, as though she'd been bracing for a battle that never quite exploded. On a chilly Tuesday morning, she walked Kevin to the school entrance. He looked up at her, gaze steady. "So, it's over, right? That big meeting." She rested a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Yes, we have an agreement now. There might still be details to work through, but the worst part is done." Kevin inhaled deeply, releasing a breath that carried relief. "That's good." She nodded, giving him a warm smile before he joined his friends inside. Watching him disappear into the hallway, she realized how much of her energy had been spent simply worrying about keeping her son safe. The meeting's resolution felt like a heavy coat slipping off her shoulders, freeing her to breathe more easily. Driving home, she played an old jazz station, letting the soft trumpet notes soothe her. She found Thomas in the garage, sorting tools with a quiet determination. He glanced over as she parked, and she noticed a tentative brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "How are you feeling?" she asked, stepping out into the cold air. He set aside a wrench and ran a hand through his hair. "Lighter." "Still a bit on edge, but lighter." She joined him, noticing how neatly he'd organized the pegboard wall with labeled hooks for each tool. "This is impressive. You could run your own workshop here," she teased softly. Thomas shrugged with a modest grin. "It's a start. Beth says once the settlement's finalized, I can begin paying off the portion I actually owe. After that, I can apply for a proper business license again. Maybe rent a small shop." Juliana's heart warmed. She thought of the day she found him shaking in the cold outside a convenience store. So much had changed. "You have people in the neighborhood who would support you," she reminded him. "Bill, Lorraine, plenty of others who've seen your work. And Kevin, of course, who seems to think you can fix anything." He paused, emotions flickering across his face. "I want to do more than just fix cars. I want to make a real life again, something stable, honest. You gave me the courage to believe that might still be possible." They chatted about the future while clearing space in the corner of the garage. Juliana could picture a tidy workstation, maybe even a sign advertising Walker Repairs. The image brought a quiet thrill, though she tried not to get ahead of herself. After all, Dwight still existed, and any misstep could reignite old conflicts. Later that afternoon, Kevin bounded home from school, cheeks flushed red from the cold. He found Thomas working on a neighbor's snowblower, knelt beside it with a socket wrench. "Need any help?" Kevin asked, curiosity lighting up his face. Thomas grinned, offering Kevin a smaller wrench. "Sure, try loosening that bolt. Not too hard, just a gentle turn." Juliana lingered by the doorway, watching them with a pang of tenderness. The hush of conflict and the sense of returning to ordinary life felt like stepping into a gentle twilight after a fierce storm. She reminded herself that this normalcy was hard-won. The documents Dwight signed had given them a path forward, but not a guarantee of perfect peace. That evening, they shared a simple dinner of spaghetti and salad. Kevin talked animatedly about a science project, while Thomas mentioned a request he'd gotten to fix an elderly neighbor's washing machine. Juliana observed the two, smiling at how naturally their conversation flowed. Every so often, she caught Thomas's eye across the table, noticing the quiet gratitude that had become almost second nature between them. After Kevin went to bed, Juliana and Thomas settled in the living room, cups of chamomile tea in hand. The living room lamp cast a soft glow over old furniture, the battered coffee table, and the small patch of newly placed tiles Thomas had repaired near the fireplace. In the silence, she remembered the raw fear they'd lived with for so long. "It's kind of strange," Thomas remarked, stirring his tea. "I can't remember the last time I sat in a house without feeling I might have to run in the morning." She scooted a bit closer on the couch, trying to read the subtle lines on his face. "You're not running," she said gently. "You're home." That word, home, hung in the air, rich with implications neither of them rushed to define. For once, the quiet that enveloped them wasn't a silence of dread or uncertainty, but one of mutual comfort. In that unspoken space, they recognized that their old routines had become something new. Little by little, they were returning to a life that felt normal, yet transformed by every challenge they had faced. Still, a fragile awareness lingered. They weren't untouched by trauma. Juliana could see it in Thomas's quick glances at the window whenever a car drove by. She felt it in her own heartbeat each time the phone rang. Yet for now, they savored the unremarkable calm of a winter evening spent in soft lamplight, practicing the art of living again without constant fear. January passed into February, bringing a slight easing of Cleveland's harsh winter. Thick snowbanks began to melt during the day, only to refreeze overnight, leaving slick patches of ice by morning. In Juliana's small house, life regained a steady rhythm. She took regular shifts at the hospital, often returning home to find Thomas immersed in another repair project. Meanwhile, Kevin darted between school, occasional visits to Lorraine's, and enthusiastic sessions watching Thomas work. One afternoon, Lorraine arrived unannounced, a bright grin on her face. "I'm sorry if I'm barging in," she said, stamping slush off her boots, "but I had to share something." She produced a small card from her purse. A contact of mine works at a community center that helps local businesses. If Thomas is serious about opening a formal repair shop, they're willing to walk him through the licensing process." Thomas stared at the card, his eyes shining with cautious hope. "I'm definitely serious. I never imagined I'd have the support to actually do it." Lorraine patted his shoulder. "You're good at what you do. People appreciate that." Juliana stepped in, glancing at the card. "This might be our chance to make it official. You don't have to jump straight into renting a building, but you can at least get the paperwork sorted." A buzz of excitement seemed to fill the living room. Kevin, who had been reading on the couch, hopped up. "Mom, does that mean Thomas could have a real shop soon?" Thomas chuckled. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I have to see what my finances look like after clearing the debt settlement." Juliana exchanged a warm look with Lorraine. "Even if it starts small, it's a goal worth aiming for." Soon after, Lorraine left for an evening shift of her own, and Juliana brewed tea for herself and Thomas. Kevin retired to his room to tackle homework, leaving them in a companionable quiet at the kitchen table. Thomas fiddled with the business card, running his thumb over the raised lettering as though trying to absorb its promise. "When I was younger," he said softly, "I dreamed of running a big auto shop, like a fancy place with multiple bays and a sign out front. But maybe that dream just needs to be scaled down. A modest shop, a good reputation, that might be enough." Juliana recognized a subtle shift in his voice, hope tinted with an acceptance that life rarely goes exactly as planned. "You could call it Walker Repairs or something simple," she suggested, smiling. "People around here already know you by name." His eyes flickered with warmth. "Walker and Butler, maybe. You've done half the work by supporting me." "It feels like our venture at this point," she laughed lightly, though a trace of emotion welled in her chest. "Don't say that unless you're serious. I'm still juggling the hospital job." He watched her face, measuring her reaction. "I am serious. You have a knack for organization. You've been the reason I managed to keep track of all these documents, not to mention scheduling repairs in your driveway. If you ever wanted to manage the front office, or at least help out, I'd be honored." She toyed with her teacup, letting the steam warm her fingers. "I never saw myself running a business," she admitted, "but I like the idea of building something meaningful, especially after everything we've been through." Before she could continue, Kevin's voice sounded from the living room. "Mom, Thomas, check this out." They rushed in to find Kevin holding up an older tablet, the screen displaying a simple digital logo he had designed, a stylized wrench and a heart with the letters W and B arranged around it. He blushed under their gazes. "I was messing around with a free graphic app. It's just a rough idea." Thomas took the tablet, grinning in surprise. "You made this." Kevin nodded eagerly. "We can change it if you don't like it." "I just thought since you guys are a team," he trailed off, but the sentiment hung in the air. Juliana blinked back a sudden rush of emotion, seeing her son so invested in their combined future. She ruffled his hair affectionately. "I love it," she said, turning to Thomas with shining eyes. "Maybe we should frame it. First design for our maybe someday business." In the weeks that followed, they took small, practical steps. Thomas visited the community center, gathering pamphlets on starting a small business. He and Juliana discussed finances late into the evening, realistically setting aside funds for licensing fees, leftover debt payments, and potential shop rentals. Meanwhile, Kevin bounced around them, offering to help with flyers or even a basic website, though they cautioned him they weren't ready for a grand opening just yet. Bit by bit, they realized they were not just patching holes in a sinking ship. They were building a sturdier vessel altogether. The adversity they'd faced had galvanized them into something resembling a real family, one that stood by each other's dreams and fears alike. As the melting snow revealed muddy patches of grass in the yard, it was easy to see parallels in their own journey. The buried ground was re-emerging, ready for new growth. Sometimes Juliana lay awake at night, remembering how harrowing the last few months had been. But in those reflections, she felt a deep gratitude for the second chances that had formed around her. She thought of how Kevin looked up to Thomas, how the neighborhood trusted his skill, how Beth's relentless work had shielded them from further threats. Perhaps that was the legacy they would share, a testament to resilience, compassion, and the quiet power of standing together when the world tried to pull them apart. A gentle thaw settled over Cleveland, ushering in the earliest hints of spring. Patches of grass peeked through the lingering snow, and sunlight stretched later into the evening. In Juliana's modest home, life pulsed with an undercurrent of promise and renewed energy. The legal settlement was all but complete, enabling Thomas to focus on legitimate debt repayments. No harassing phone calls had come in over a month, and Dwight seemed content to keep his distance, perhaps realizing he had more to lose by stirring up trouble again. On a Saturday morning, Juliana woke to the hum of conversation outside. She peeked through the window to see Thomas and Kevin standing by a small table in the driveway, discussing the workings of a dismantled lawnmower. Kevin listened with rapt attention, while Thomas pointed out different components, occasionally pausing to let Kevin try unscrewing a bolt or adjusting a belt. Pulling on a sweater, she made her way outside, letting the crisp air flush her cheeks. "So what's the verdict?" she asked, eyeing the rusted machine. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag. "We can bring it back to life, I think. Neighbor wanted to toss it, but I offered to fix it cheap." Kevin grinned. "He's teaching me how all the parts fit together. It's like a puzzle, but cooler." Juliana placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his excitement. "I'm glad you two found a project to share." The three of them talked about the upcoming weeks, Kevin's school break, potential repair jobs from local referrals, and a date for Thomas to file his final paperwork at the community center. There was no definitive timeline for opening a full-fledged business yet, but they had a direction. Inside, the phone buzzed with a text from Beth, congratulating them on being in the clear. Juliana replied with a quick thanks, her fingers trembling slightly with relief. She recalled the day she first called Beth, frantic, unsure if Thomas could truly escape his past. Now everything felt different, not perfect, but steadier. A few days later, Bill Carmichael organized a neighborhood cookout in his backyard. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering to celebrate the end of winter's tight grip. He insisted that Thomas bring the newly repaired lawnmower and demonstrate its magical revival. Juliana smiled at the invitation, touched by the neighborly acceptance that seemed to have grown around them. They arrived at Bill's place in the late afternoon. The last rays of sun bathed the tidy yard, where a handful of people chatted around a modest grill. Lorraine stood nearby, sipping lemonade and waving them over. "I've been bragging about Thomas to half the neighborhood," she teased, leading them to a table. "They all want to see if he really can fix anything." Thomas placed the mower in an open area, giving a quick overview of the repairs. Kevin, brimming with pride, stood at his side as he pulled the starter cord. A sputtering sound gave way to a smooth purr, earning appreciative applause from the small crowd. Bill grinned, slapping Thomas on the back. "You've got a real knack, my friend." Juliana watched from a short distance, her heart swelling with affection. She noticed Kevin quietly boasting to another boy about how he'd helped. A sense of belonging had grown between them all, neighbors, co-workers, a newly formed support system that had rallied around Thomas when he was most vulnerable. After a round of burgers and hot dogs, the group shifted into easy conversations. Lorraine asked Juliana about balancing hospital shifts and her new quasi-role managing Thomas's side gigs. Bill chimed in, boasting about how Thomas had saved him hundreds of dollars in repair fees. Laughter and cheerful banter filled the evening air. As twilight descended, Juliana found herself standing by a corner of the yard, watching the sky fade into streaks of pink and orange. Thomas joined her, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply listened to the murmured voices behind them and the chirp of early spring crickets. "It's strange to think how this all began," Thomas said quietly. "A freezing night, me with nowhere to go, and you risking so much to help a stranger." Juliana glanced at him, recalling the memory with a surge of gratitude. "I couldn't have known where it would lead. But I'm glad I trusted my instinct that night." He offered a gentle smile, eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. "I'll never stop being thankful for that couch you let me sleep on. Not just for shelter, but for a second chance." She felt her chest tighten with emotion. "You earned it, Thomas. You proved that when someone invests a little faith in you, you return it tenfold." They turned to look back at Kevin, who was playfully chasing a friend with a half-inflated beach ball. A surge of warmth rippled through Juliana at the sight. Her son had gained not just a mentor, but a real sense of family that she alone had struggled to provide. "Think we'll ever open that shop?" Thomas asked, keeping his tone casual, but hope underlined his words. "I do," Juliana replied. "Maybe not tomorrow, but soon enough. We'll do it right, step by step." He extended an arm, and she leaned into him, letting the sense of closeness calm the last remnants of her old fears. For so long, she had navigated the world alone, racked by financial strain, heartbreak, and an unspoken loneliness. Now there was a shared future in sight. Uncertain, yes, but filled with possibilities once unseen. As the last traces of daylight slipped beneath the horizon, they walked back toward the group, side by side. In that moment, there was no grand fanfare or climactic declaration, just the gentle truth that they'd found their way to a new life, one defined not by desperation or looming shadows, but by collective perseverance, quiet hope, and the kind of love born from compassion freely given. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.